participating in the gallery this evening, and also welcoming those that are participating virtually with us. This is the Development and Operations Services Standing Committee for Tuesday, October 11th. And so I call the committee to order, and I will begin with our land acknowledgement. For more than 15,000 years, the First Nations walked upon and cared for the lands we now call home. Anishinaabek, Haudenosaunee, Ojibwe, and many others who were families, friends, and communities the way we are today. The town of Collingwood acknowledges the Lake Simcoe-Nottawasaga Treaty of 1818 and the relationship it establishes with the original inhabitants of Turtle Island. We acknowledge the reality of our shared history and the current contributions of Indigenous people within our community. We seek to continue empowering expressions of pride amongst all the diverse stakeholders in this area. We seek to do better and to continue to recognize, learn, and grow in friendship and community, nation to nation. Thank you for that. And just before we begin the adoption of the agenda, I'd just like to turn it over to Mayor Hull for a brief announcement.
Thank you, Chair Jeffrey. On behalf of the corporation and council, I'd just like to extend to our colleagues in the town of Blue Mountains. Yesterday afternoon, Jim Erm, who is a current or was serving as a current councillor, passed away. He had been ill for some time, but Jim, if you know him, served many years ago prior to the amalgamation. He was a councillor with Thornbury, but professionally, prior to retirement, he was a planner locally, serving both in Meaford and Clearview Township. And so I just wanted to pass along to Mayor Sauvert. It's been a tough term. They've had one member resign, of course, not quite a year ago. Deputy Mayor Potter passed away, and now Mr. Yerm, Councillor Yerm. So our condolences and thoughts. Thank you.
Thank you for that. All right, so with respect to the adoption of the agenda, I just have the following amendments, and there's been written copies circulated to the committee members. For now, I'm just going to do the higher level. So 6.3, I would want to let you know as chair, I intend to use my authority to sever paragraphs in their entirety and in part to facilitate the decision-making process. I think it'll make the discussion go much easier. And under 6.4, the second paragraph and that is removed, as the CAO will be updating on use of delegated authority and no direction will be required to be recommended to council by this committee. Under 7.1, the words to be added after September 26, 2022 be received and the recommendations contained therein and not included in Planning Report 6.3 be approved. And then 9.1 is deferred until Manager Kenny is available to present. And just by way of an agenda comment under 9.2, as the backflow prevention bylaw program is a bylaw enforcement matter, no discussion on specific addresses will be entertained in the questions to staff this evening. Specific property questions should be addressed to bylaw and or the appropriate staff. So with that, I would ask for a mover and a seconder, or actually, first of all, I'll ask if there's any other additions or amendments. And then seeing none, then I'll ask for a mover and a seconder of the agenda as amended. Mayor Hull, Vice Chair Doherty, all those in favor? That is carried unanimously. Thank you very much. Are there any declarations of pecuniary interest? Thank you, Mayor Hull.
Thank you, Chair Jeffrey. And it's a non-disqualifying conflict, so I won't be leaving the table. It's in reference to Staff Report P 2022-36, and this is the heritage grants that we're reviewing tonight. The property, 64 Huron Street, I represented the applicant back in February of 2020, so pre-pandemic, when they acquired the property. So I'm just making people aware of that. And the other item, as it relates to 72 First Street, I am not declaring a conflict at this point. However, I'm advising the committee that throughout the report prepared by staff, there is reference to 12 4th Street West, which I have declared a conflict in the past. And should the discussion veer in such a way where I feel that I shouldn't be at the table, I will remove myself at that point. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much for that. Okay, and if something comes up during the meeting, we all know by now to bring it to the chair's attention, and we will make sure that you are able to declare and recuse yourself. So is there any business arising from the previous meeting? Okay, don't see any, which will bring us then to the deputations. And 5.1 is the opposition to 3rd Street and Ontario Street bypass roadworks. And Lorie Russell will be speaking. And Lorie, if you have any of the rest of your team you want to bring up, you can invite them and introduce them at that time. So I just ask you to formally introduce yourself and your address, please.
Yes, thank you, and good evening. My name is Lorie Russell. Just for reference, the bulk of our historical data that accompanies my presentation this evening, we understand will be available online tomorrow for those who are in the gallery and those who are with us virtually. We are here today to bring to your attention a series of deficiencies in the current draft OP and its basis. We are looking to committee for a motion to suspend adoption of the draft OP's transportation policies and schedules and to suspend further spending on roads and infrastructure pending the adoption of a properly funded master transportation and mobility plan. Our primary areas of concern are the 3rd Street, Ontario Street alignment and the proposed road structure between 3rd Street and the intersection of High and 1st Streets. The foundation of our concern is that the studies and data in the OP's transportation policies are outdated and lack a much-needed modern approach to the safety of vulnerable street users. None of the Collingwood Master Transportation Plan of 1974, the 2012 Collingwood Transportation Study, the 2019 Transportation Study Update, or the developer-funded Crozier report proposing the Cambridge and 3rd Streets connection consider weekend traffic, modern web-based traffic flow data, or the impacts to the 3rd Street and surrounding streets' traffic volumes. More broadly, none consider any need for comprehensively managing safety for vulnerable street users throughout the town. All of these reports make recommendations without a comprehensive residential impact study. With regards to 3rd Street, the suggestion of an extension west of High Street connecting to the 10th concession is problematic from environmental, economic, and safety perspectives. It would entail yet another expensive crossing over Black Ash Creek, and it would pass through the middle of a proposed residential neighborhood. It proposes offloading crosstown traffic into residential neighborhoods without extensive analysis and public consultation. The realignment of the traffic lights from Home Depot to 3rd Street is recommended without identifying how it moderates traffic on both 2nd and 3rd Streets and without evaluating any alternatives. The report also does not consider the impact of a higher volume of traffic at the intersection of 3rd and Huron Streets. Current thinking in town planning should prioritize safety over traffic efficiency. Planning livable communities that are sustainable and anticipate the future impact of climate crisis has shifted the focus to active and multimodal transportation. The safety of vulnerable street users should be paramount. Safety is achievable through measures such as low traffic speeds below 40 kilometers an hour, reduction of volume of cars, street design such as complete streets, which you will find notation of what we're referring to in these documents with examples in your attachments that you will find tomorrow, including signage and traffic signaling. For example, leading pedestrian interval, allowing pedestrians to enter the intersection before cars, and having designated cycling lanes with signals. We are concerned. Poor street and intersection design leads to increased death and injuries. The official plan and a new master transportation and mobility plan should inform each other. Without these two policy documents being updated, it is not efficient to spend today's tax dollars based on decades-old policies. We are looking for forward-thinking and environmentally sustainable solutions to be adopted. You have stated our town is poised to double its population in the next 20 years. The future of this town needs to be focused on providing healthy and inclusive neighborhoods. The 15-minute neighborhood is a concept which the town would benefit to adopt in its official plan. The Ottawa OP, again, highlighted in the overview that will be presented tomorrow online. The Ottawa OP is an excellent example of how this was incorporated. Collingwood has also adopted a motion declaring a climate crisis. Environmentally sustainable policies should guide the implementation and design of our streets. By reducing the use of private vehicles, promoting public transit, and active transportation, the CO2 emissions are greatly reduced. The design of public spaces, which includes streets that encourage multimodal transportation, will incorporate designs that increase the tree canopy, which also has many benefits. The targets as laid out by the Ottawa's OP are detailed, reflecting environmentally sustainable development. The drafting of the OP and the Master Transportation and Mobility Plan needs resident input to ensure a well-thought-out, forward-thinking plan. A Master Transportation and Mobility Plan committee that reports back to Council may be an efficient tool. We ask that you commit to open public reviews of all policy documents, implementation, and designs before they are finalized. The following are our requests and the draft motion for their adoption. Request number 1, Committee and Council to direct staff to respond to the questions submitted on our behalf as well as other residents at the September 14th meeting with a deadline, please. Request number 2, Committee Council to draft, and this is our ask, the Committee and Council to draft a motion to suspend execution and any further spending on roadwork and infrastructure pending the adoption of a properly funded master mobility transportation plan. Number 3, defer the OP's transportation policies and roads, Schedule 6 in the attachment. Request 4, bring terms of reference for the Master Transportation and Mobility Plan to a committee council meeting for public review and input before the study goes to an RFP, request for proposal. These need to address data from smart cell phone-based traffic modeling. Example, instant traffic data beyond sensors and traffic monitoring cameras. We've suggested an example, streetlightdata.com as a reference. Appropriate roles and designs for residential collector streets, neighborhood traffic impact, weekend and Saturday retail-driven traffic counts. Opportunities for public review as the Master Transportation and Mobility Plan advances, a comprehensive integration of active transport and trails, safe streets, and Vision Zero as guiding principles. Number 5, bring a draft Master Transportation and Mobility Plan back to Committee Council prior to finalization to enable public review and input. Number 6, reconsider the OP policies and schedules in light of this Master Transportation and Mobility Plan. And 7, adopt a complete new OP with an updated view of community-based transportation planning for safely. We look to staff and council for strong leadership, collaboration, and a fully fleshed vision of our beautiful town. Thank you so much for your time.
Oh, well, thank you for engaging with our committee and bringing your information, and lots of it, backing it up. Ms. Russell, before you sit down, I'll just ask if there's any questions that anyone has in terms of, we want a staff response in the beginning first, though, I believe. CEO Skinner, would you like to respond or make comment?
Thank you, Chair. We would be happy to have Director Slama and I say a few words around where we are and what we've heard, if that would be helpful.
Yes, please do so.
Okay.
Thank you. Good evening, Chair Jeffrey and committee members and members of the public who are in council chambers this evening. So first, I just wanted to thank the deputant for speaking tonight and speaking on behalf of a group of interested residents and engaged residents in town. As mentioned, staff did meet with quite a large group of engaged residents, but we appreciate the effort that's been put in the documentation provided this evening, because it not only covers their concerns, but they appreciate the effort that they took to look back on a bit of history and also look forward and gather some information on what other Ontario municipalities are doing with respect to visions and planning for safer street concepts, such as complete communities or complete streets and Vision Zero and some of those. And I would like to mention that, as staff, we have a lot of the same goals, I think. And I think that, some of the requests that were made this evening are in line with what staff themselves are proposing, which is also a result of what we're hearing from committee and council members as well. So when we look back at the last few years, I think that as a community, we have made some improvements. We have listened to residents and council. We've implemented a traffic calming policy. We've implemented some of those traffic calming measures. We identified, our school areas as our priority areas. And, even looking at how we evolved with the pedestrian crosswalk at the Hamilton Drain. I think that's, we implemented something, that when you look at the guidelines and the standards that, should have worked, but we saw after, hearing from, again, residents and council, it wasn't working the way we needed it to work. And we made that change to something that is better in serving our active transportation users in a better way. So as I said, I think we do have a lot of the same goals. We are looking at the same information. We're looking at the same references. We're looking to our greater Ontario municipalities that have successfully implemented some of these measures and how they have transitioned from, from a municipality that needs to serve more people, and ways that we can change the philosophy of how our residents and our visitors are moving around our town in all different modes of transportation beyond just cars. And so part of that is staff are bringing forward moving forward from 2024 to 2023. In the 2023 budget, we're bringing forward a transportation master plan, which we see as being an opportunity to complete a comprehensive study that will bring some of the pieces, some of the good work that we've already done in our community, look at the pieces of our active transportation plan and our cycling plan and our transportation update. Bring those together more, as Lorie says, right, with one document. Look at everything together rather than individually. Evolve that, because some of those concepts, things have changed. We know that some of the guidelines and standards on design have changed just in the last 2 years. So the plan the master plan that we're bringing forward, we are bringing forward a master plan in 23. It is a large study. It will take time to complete. We do expect it to take at least 12 months to complete. So, council and the public should be mindful of that. That's such a large, comprehensive outlook. Does take time to accurately gather all the right information and include that public consultation and make the right decisions for our community going forward. So that was just something else I wanted to mention. So those are my thoughts, and I'll pass it over to CAO Skinner. Thank you.
Thank you, Director Slama.
Sure. Just a couple of quick additions. Thank you, everyone who's here and listening online. Council has always been quite clear about strict adherence to making sure there was lots of public engagement on any of the master plans we're bringing forward or policies. And I'm we're always open to hearing how to do that better, but it's really good when we do see people coming in and talking about the kind of community that they want, so that council members can hear and staff can hear. I'm a traffic engineer by training and practice, and I spent more than 20 years in that field. So everything you're saying tonight is very near and dear to my heart. I did want to put a couple of things on the table. Given how close the election is, being on October 24th, in every likelihood, many of the decisions around the new official plan will be made by the new or newly elected or re-elected council members. I do have some concerns about putting and would provide this recommendation to council in the future for their decision. It would be their decision around holding back all of the official plan, because there are some pieces that are very important around affordable housing, even things like the philosophies of having a 15-minute town, for example, are the kind of things that would be embedded in an official plan, should one go forward at the timing council wishes. Also, given that we're not making transportation changes within this official plan, gives me some pause, and the fact that there are some new ideas coming forward, and our commitment to do a study in the near future with input from people like you, I think is very positive. And there is a request to stop some investments in transportation for the next year, but we do believe that there's many investments across town that, from a staff perspective, or even from an asset condition or pothole perspective, or putting in new pedestrian crosswalks, for example, that we feel are very strongly warranted. I don't have full confirmation, but I don't think we have capital investments planned on 3rd, which I think is one of the streets of interest in 2022 or 2023. So there wouldn't be items that are immediately on the agenda for council's vote related to that specific part of town. And thank you again.
Thank you, CEO Skinner. So while we still have the deputant with us, do any of the other committee members have any questions or comments that they'd like to make? Diane.
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. I just want to thank you for that presentation. It was excellent and really reflects certainly what I've been thinking, and I know maybe all of our committee members have been thinking. And it is very much what I read all the time: safety before volume and speed. And I know it's a new concept for many communities, but for sure it should be embedded into whatever we do. It only makes sense. I am grateful for the comments from our staff, and I think Director Slama's comments are right in that, we have proceeded with roadworks that haven't done the job. And so we've had to turn to traffic calming and, I made a list here of the other things she said. But anyway, there's been a few things we've had to do because the roads don't work. So I am very much in favor of making sure we get the roads right before we put money into them. And we've had some discussions around this table, but I don't think it's come to a vote yet, around even simple things like don't redo any roads unless we put bike lanes in them. And, there's just a lot of things that this presentation gives rise to that we've had some discussions but haven't finalized into any firm way. So I'm really grateful for this. I do think that we need to have your questions from the September 14th meeting. Have these been presented to staff already through you, Madam Chair? Yeah. So, and maybe I'll just ask this question to our CAO. Is there a date that you would recommend that we get these answers back?
I think through the chair that the Director Slama probably has her hands closer to those, although I did read them over after they were discussed at the community meeting.
Director Slama?
Thank you, Chair. So staff have been working to put together responses to the questions, juggling around our other large priorities at this time of year, predominantly budget. So I would say 2 more weeks is probably, we could probably commit to that.
What, Councillor Hammond?
Yes. Secondly, the second request, which is to suspend execution, further spending on road work and infrastructure, pending the adoption of the Master Transportation Plan. I think what I'd like to turn this into is a motion to have staff to report back with the budget on what roadworks and infrastructure could safely be deferred pending a properly funded master transportation and mobility transportation plan. Because I'm mindful of the comment our CIO made, there's been discussion about, for example, a temporary crosswalk being put up on High Street at Finlay and Plews Drive. So that wouldn't have to await a master traffic study. So I would like, if I can put together a motion of this, it would be that, just as I said, that we ask staff to report back at the time of the budget on a list of road work and infrastructure that could properly be deferred pending this master transportation plan.
Councillor Hammond?
yes.
I'm just going to intercede there. You're getting close to your 5 minutes, and if you're going to go through all 7, we kind of need. But yes, you can definitely do a notice of motion, and it would be enough time for it to appear on the October 17th agenda.
Would you like me to do the motion at the end of the meeting?
No, I think while our deputant is here and those that are interested, if you just want to give your notice of motion, there's no direction
Okay.
this evening. It doesn't occur, but we know that it's going to come up on the October 17th agenda.
Right. Yes, we have a new rule. We're only allowed to speak for 5 minutes. So I'll just say what I'm doing. So for request 3, part of the motion would be to defer the official plan's transportation policies and roads Schedule 6 until the adoption of the Master Transportation Plan. I do like the idea, and I would like staff comments and recommendations on a terms of reference for a transportation and mobility committee that would look at the terms of reference and also at the draft prior to it being released to the public. And I think that would probably cover the rest of the things as well. Thank you.
Okay, and you'll submit that in writing to staff so that they can.
If our
Yes.
clerk requires that, certainly.
Yeah, that would be helpful, I think, for the wording. Okay. Thank you for that, Councillor Hammond. So just so you understand that Councillor Hammond's notice of motion will be considered by Council on October 17th.
Wonderful. Thank
Yeah.
you very much for that.
Yeah. Do either of the other committee members? Yep. Mayor Hall.
Thank you. The first question actually is for clarification as it relates to the entire agenda. Is tonight's entire agenda being forwarded to the meeting of council on the 17th? Is that the intent? Perfect. Okay. Thank you. I appreciate that. And for those who are maybe not familiar or are watching at home, the reference to the meeting on the 14th, just to connect the dots. Oh, my apologies. I've never been accused of that before, Jack, so thank you. Just for clarity, the meeting that's been referenced on September the 14th, that meeting was the meeting with residents and staff. Is that correct? Okay, perfect. I appreciate all of the time and effort that has been put into the report and the information that will be brought forward to our attention tomorrow. Just in referencing and taking a look at some of the points, emphasized as it relates to success stories from Kitchener, Waterloo. I have been accused in the past of continually referencing those works, and why wouldn't I? It's something that I'm familiar with, and they've done a good job. I also appreciate the comment that was made tonight with regards to the 15-minute rule, and that is something that as a community we should be achieving or trying to aspire to. It's unfortunate, if I may use an example, and the circumstances may be completely unrelated, but within this particular street or the reference, a commercial entity that had been sort of an institution for some time, Charlie's Variety, closed. But we want want to see that type of investment to be able to create those 15-minute spheres. And the last, and I guess this is maybe a failure on my part because I've mentioned it a couple of times, but I've never really taken it to the next step. But I would hope, and for those around the table and for those that are joining us in the audience tonight who would like to be around the table next term, that these conversations need to be done in alignment with our two, actually it's not two, it's multiple respective school boards, so that when we are planning and we are building out schools, and I'm thinking more at the lower level, the elementary as opposed to the high school, but high school should be included, that we get away from the tragedy, and that's, I don't want to overstate, but maybe I am, of what we've created, where we have literally kids being bused from the west side of town to a school on the east side of town. And quite frankly, I don't care what anyone says. Every time you come back to it, it was just a matter of long-term planning and not taking into account the growth that was going to be built out. And therefore, to accommodate growth and to accommodate movement of kids, it was an easy decision just to say, well, we'll take them from point A over to point B when we'll put them in buses or, SUVs, et cetera. And that is contrary to everything that, that this document that's been prepared would speak to. The last point, it was dovetailing on that. Oh, and the last point is that I do think that we have, we perhaps don't have the authority, but we certainly, I think, have the mandate. And I certainly think that our constituents have the mandate that we demand from our school board that they start to actually enforce the neighborhood in which you live in is the school in which you attend. It serves two purposes. One is it promotes walkability, active transportation, because now instead of being bused or taking an SUV across town, you're actually walking or biking. More importantly, and this is a completely separate issue, is that it helps to support the socioeconomic diversity within a particular school as opposed to removing and shipping out to another school. That's a different issue altogether. So thank you. I've probably come up on my 5 minutes, and that's the Keith Hall rule, and I apologize for that. So anyway, thank you.
Okay, yeah, thank you. And Councillor Doherty, go ahead.
Yes, thank you very much. Just going to be less than 5 minutes, I promise. First of all, to congratulate this deputant and the group in our gallery tonight for the depth and breadth of the considerations that you have brought forward. And I cannot say that I am not in agreement with you, because I certainly am. The other thing that I wanted to ask, but I think the CAO has confirmed this. There was a recommendation that we should delay the adoption of the OP, but I do agree that these matters, transportation matters, are important, but there were other matters that are being addressed in the OP that are urgent, in my view. So just to confirm that we can step away from any commitments to master transportation within the OP without not adopting the balance of the OP. We can still proceed.
Yes, and I will put that through to Acting Director of Planning, Lindsay Ayres. Did I get that title right? Yeah.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Through you to Councillor Doherty. There's certainly components to the official plan. I have not been involved in this conversation to the extent that Director Valentine has been, but certainly we would like to continue work on the official plan while these larger transportation matters are being addressed. I'm not sure if conversations have occurred to date as to whether that section would come at a later date or whether the existing transportation policies would remain, and there's always opportunity to amend those sections corrections subsequent to the official plan. But I think the direction is, or at least the direction staff would like to take, is to continue working on those other aspects of the official plan while these larger transportation policies are being looked at in further detail.
Can I ask a question? Is it
Yep,
proper
just
form?
just one moment. Just let me ask Councillor Doherty if she has her answer and if she has follow up, and then we'll.
Oh, I
Yeah,
apologize.
no, that's
Thank
fine.
you.
Yes, yeah, I do have the answer. Yeah,
Okay,
thank you.
All right, that's great.
To that
Sure.
question.
Yeah. So go ahead.
I'm just curious, based on the presentation and all of the activity that we've had and voiced over the last couple of months about our concerns about the OP, to you, what changes for you tomorrow, and has it changed since we've shared with you our concerns? How do you approach that OP tomorrow, given everything that we've outlined in the 31 pages of detail that we've presented?
Lindsay, you want to go ahead and respond to that?
Thank you, through you, Madam Chair, to the Deputant. We received a large volume of comments in response to the first draft of the official plan. So staff and the consultants involved in the official plan update are currently in the process of reviewing all of those comments, coming up with response matrices as to how each comment has been considered. And we are anticipating that a second draft of the official plan will certainly be advanced for the public's and future council's consideration. I can't speak to some of the technical aspects, because understanding that some of the requests are going to require much more detailed study and technical involvement on the transportation piece. But certainly I would expect that some of the comments will be integrated into the second draft. And if there are some that will require further technical review or study, then that is something we can certainly look forward to in a future iteration. But again, there were a large volume of comments. A number of them were transportation related from this particular group and others, and then a large number of comments in response to other aspects of the official plan. So we are diligently working through those comments, and you will see a revised second draft coming in future months that address the comments by staff and the consultants involved in the project.
Okay,
Okay, good.
thank you.
All right, you're welcome. That was your questions, or
No, I've got one more.
Okay, go ahead.
So now, Director Slama alluded to the fact that we would be looking at a master transportation plan in 2020 through 23, extended possibly into 2024. So I think I also have the answer to this, but I for one would not want to see any substantial or transformational changes to our transportation plan until that study is completed. So in particular, anything to do with 3rd Street as an example, or High Street, other than those changes that might be necessitated by a need for safety improvements. And Councillor Hamlin did allude to Finley and High. Mm-hmm. So just to confirm.
Okay, so through to the acting director of planning, just to confirm the critical path going forward in terms of how we align. And you may not have the answer yet. You may have to give it going forward. But do you have an initial response for Councillor Doherty, please?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Through to Councillor Doherty. I think in terms of the steps and the sequence as to which aspects can be incorporated into the next iteration of the official plan draft and which ones will require further study, I would like to take that back and discuss it with the broader project team that's involved in the official plan update, as I've not been as extensively involved as Director Valentine and the planning consultants involved in it. So I would like to take that back for further discussion.
Sorry, I perhaps didn't state that question properly. It wasn't whether these items would be considered within the official plan. It's that any substantial changes to our actual transportation system would be made before we have a new master transportation plan.
I'll let the CAO respond, but go ahead.
Thank you, Councillor Doherty. We don't have big changes planned to the transportation system. There are some projects that we've been, Director Slama and her team have been designing based on the cycling plan and our active transportation intentions, for example, to include separate or roadside bike lanes, for example. But some of the things that were mentioned in the concerns today, things like extensions of 3rd Westerly to 10th, will not be implemented prior to the study that we've been discussing tonight.
Okay, thank you. Those are my questions.
Okay, thank you. Mayor Hall?
Thank you. Through you to the CAO, a specific question. And I apologize, I didn't send this in advance, but I just thought of it now, and it was specific to the 40-kilometer speed enforcement. So we did have that come to the table, and it was defeated. And it was referred then to staff that staff would bring forward a report. Where does that fit into this conversation?
CO?
I think that Director Slama has been planning that as part of the.
I see your hand up there,
Thank you.
Director Slama. Go ahead.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I can provide an update on that. So you are correct, Mayor Hall. There was direction through council to proceed with a speed reduction study for Collingwood as a community, for the entire community. So it is part of our operational plan for 2022. It did get delayed with one member of staff that was leading that departing. So we have reinitiated that. And I think that we're trying to be mindful that any of the projects and information that we're gathering with some of our studies this year will just be able to help inform a master transportation plan. So, if it's data collected in 22, we'll feel comfortable using it in 23. For instance, for the speed study, we're measuring some vehicles and speeds and doing vehicle pedestrian counts, active transportation user cyclist counts, things like that with the speed reduction study. So we will likely do more locations. We'll augment the number of locations when we go to the transportation master plan, but we would still use that information.
Thank you. Yep.
Thank you. I appreciate the response. And if I could just make this comment, and this is a comment for staff as somebody who will not be here next term, and that is that please, and I say this with all due respect, bring these things forward as soon as possible. I think to the 9 around the table, if you're going to implement very progressive change, the analogy that I would use, if I was to use a traffic analogy, is asking somebody to get on their 18-speed bike and then pull by chain a parked transport truck, and the truck being the community. And it is going to take a monumental shift. And there's reference in here to Mr. Hauser's presentation that he made, I think it was to this committee as well. And the comments afterward, and I thought, here's a person who is simply just stating observations and expressing concern about his neighborhood. And yet some of the concerns online were as divisive and visceral as possible. And so to the next council, this is going to be probably, maybe issue 1, 2, 3 in terms of priority. And it is going to take a real collaborative effort and spirit to be able to move it forward. And staff's part in that will be to make sure that the information and the documents are upfront as soon as possible, because the city of Kitchener recently passed the 40-kilometer speed zone. And it'll be interesting on the 24th of October how many of those councillors who voted in favor will actually be reelected. And the reason I say that is, had they done it 3 years prior and had that runway to work with, they may, because I think it's a good policy, and that would be a non-issue. But because they're working through the challenges today, right now, it is an election issue. And as I said, those persons are in jeopardy of not being voted back. So I just think that, this is one of many changes or challenges, but it's got to be given the appropriate runway so that to make the change, you've got 3 years to implement it, to be able to show the progress, the challenges where there has to be change made to keep going, the failures to work on those types of things, but so that the community can buy in and move it, because it's not 9 and it's not staff. The community has to buy in moving forward. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Just thank you, Madam Chair. I just wanted to comment on what our mayor's been asking questions on, which is the speed reduction study. And to echo in part what he's saying, I think our community has to understand the safe streets concept, which this group obviously understands in spades, but I would say a lot of our community does not. So I would leave it with staff because, maybe I won't be here either, but to consider bringing forward before the results of the study even, the concept of safe streets and all of these principles that a healthy, vibrant community we know now should be incorporating into the design of its road network. So that staff that council, our new council, has some education around this and some framework in which to consider all these issues. Thank you.
Okay, so I think we've had excellent discussion this evening. I'll give you 1 minute to wrap your comments. Ms. Russell.
Thank you very much for all of your comments and your questions, and thank you for appreciating the amount of work that went in on behalf of a very large group of people. My question, and I don't want to pose this, I don't want to speak on behalf of the entire committee, but I will say for myself that based on the vision that we have for what the town of Collingwood could look like, I'll express my own concern when Ms. Slama speaks about the merger of 2022 transportation data into what we believe to be a pure, brand new study that looks at a whole new opportunity for us to have this engineered effectively. I won't ask what the ratio of how much the 2022 data and previous data will be merged into the new transportation study, but if I know my group well enough and some of the residents, I think that's going to be a bit of a concern. So I would anticipate that if we have the opportunity to speak to you again, going forward, that will be something that we'll be interested in finding more detail about how that previous historical data is utilized going forward into what we're asking for a brand new study.
Great.
Okay?
Excellent. Okay. Thank you for clarifying that position and for all of your work. So you are all welcome to stay, but you're also all welcome to go and enjoy your evening if you wish. And if there's a great number of you, I might ask you to do it so we can bring our next deputants up without too much disruption.
Hello, am I broadcasting live here in the town of Collingwood?
Okay. How are they doing that? All right. All right, so this brings us to 5.2, which is our second deputation, and it's regarding the heritage permit for 72 First Street. We have Harley Valentine virtually, and we have Mr. Andrew LeBlanc in the gallery. So, Mr. LeBlanc, if you would like to come forward, please. I understand that you are going to do a tag team here, and you'll...
I'll let Harley start off first, though.
Okay, all right, thank you. Mr. Valentine, welcome, and you are welcome to take the lead.
Thank you. Sorry, I unfortunately couldn't join. I'm so pleased that Andrew could be there in person. Mayor, Council, Chair, really excited to be a member of the town of Collingwood and the neighborhood of downtown Collingwood. We had the great fortune in early 2021 to acquire 71st Street, which was the former KFC. and shortly thereafter acquired 72 First Street. And I start there because I wanted to provide a little bit of context about how we arrived in this meeting today. I'm a partner at Castle Point Numa. We're a development company that believes in building community and looks for assets at the end of a life cycle for higher and better uses to both serve community and quality housing in the future. Focusing on 72 First Street, it's the former San Domingo restaurant. There's always been a history and a heritage there of food and beverage. And as part of our development process, we don't like to see buildings sit vacant. We know that's a cause of concern. That's a depression as far as what other small businesses could come in and create vitality to both the public realm and also to the general commerce of the town. It is such a pleasure to connect with strong business leaders, and especially those in the food and beverage industry coming out of COVID. Andrew LeBlanc owns what I think is the top pizza shop in downtown Grimsby called Bello Pizza. He's also a resident of Meaford, and him and his family are looking to spend more time up in your community and really make this a destination for artisanal pizza, food and beverage. And as a landlord, we're really excited to get behind him and to do the maximum. And in what that means is by fully appointing the former San Domingo's restaurant to modern quality standards. This is going to be really a pizza shop to brag about. And I'm really excited for Andrew to open the doors there in what we are anticipating about 6 to 12 weeks. And in our excitement and in our regeneration of the site, of course, we thought what better way to sort of make it a destination, make it stand out against its former use by painting 3 sides of the building. The frontage was board and batten. It was a bit tired and needed some serious repair. And then we painted the 2-side brick on the building, also white, eventually to be matched to a heritage color. And I'm going to go back to when we originally bought the site. Our practice is to assemble properties where there's an opportunity to build new retail, new housing, and this site is a key for one of those. However, the current tenancy will actually live on into the future building. So there will be a blackout period, some 5-6 years in the future when we redevelop. But until then, we will be making the highest and best use of that space. So in getting ahead of ourselves and painting the building, we always knew that the building itself would be slated for demolition because it is not, in fact, a heritage building. However, I respect that it exists within a heritage core. So there we sort of catch ourselves. And the bylaw officer rightly pointed this out to us, as well as my planner, Kristen Rennie. And I know that we had applied for an exemption to that permit under that basis. But I just wanted to come in front of council and in front of the good people of Collingwood today to sort of provide that context about our excitement, about our investment, and also, you know, to make an introduction to Andrew, who will speak more meaningfully in detail about his business and his family in Collingwood. But you know, the request of council today is they understand that context, and I'm happy to respond to any questions. And the ask is to allow us to use the paint appropriate that's accommodated within the Heritage District on a building that will eventually be demolished as part of a future demolition. So that's it from my side. I look forward to fielding any questions. Andrew, over to you in council's chambers there. Thanks.
Thank you, Harley. Yeah, we've been very excited to get something in motion here for not only myself, but for the community. I've been coming up here since I was 2 years old. My family is intertwined in Collingwood and the surround for forever. I've been cooking for the better part of 25 years, not only in Canada, but internationally. So we're looking to bring forth a kind of staple within the community that has a really high level of cuisine, not only Italian, but many other things. So it'll be a really fun destination within the community, and we're really excited to be a part of it. So as Harley said, you know, our excitement got ahead of us, and we really hope that we can make amends and look to move forward in the most positive way possible. That's all I really have to add at the moment. Unless you have questions for me, I'd be happy to answer them.
Okay. Thank you very much. Are there any questions from the committee? Okay. All right. Succinct. Thank you very much. And your item is further down on the agenda, and we will talk about it there. So thank you for being here. All right, so that brings us to number 6 on the agenda, which is the staff reports. So we will begin with 6.1, P 2022-34, 23, don't think that 23 should be there. Proposed zoning bylaw amendment of 23 Georgian Manor Drive. And I will ask our acting director of planning to introduce, or her designate.
Second time at this podium in several years. I'm going to get used to it again. Good evening, Madam Chair, members of the committee, and members of the public attending this evening. Further to the public meeting that was held approximately 2 weeks ago, staff report P 2022-34 pertains to a proposed zoning bylaw amendment for 23 Georgian Manor Drive. Community Planner Dillman, the planner assigned to this particular file, is away this evening, so I will be delivering the presentation in her absence. Next slide, please. So this is a 2018 aerial image of the subject property, which is bound by Georgian Bay to the north, residential lands to the east and west, and Georgian Manor Drive to the south. Next slide, please. So there's an existing 86 square meter or 927 square foot single detached dwelling, an associated septic system, and a detached accessory garage building on the subject property today. And a 65 square meter second unit is proposed on the second floor of the existing detached accessory building, which you can see in the photo to the right-hand side of the screen. A new septic bed is also proposed to service the second unit to the north of the detached accessory building. Next slide, please. So the zoning bylaw amendment proposes to rezone the subject property from the residential first density zone to a residential first density exception 14 zone. And the R114 exception provision would identify that a second unit on the subject property shall not exceed 76% of the gross floor area of the single detached dwelling, whereas second units are not to exceed 40% of the GFA of a single detached dwelling per the town's current zoning bylaw. Next slide, please. So a statutory public meeting regarding the proposed zoning bylaw amendment was held on September 26, 2022. A total of 3 individuals provided oral submissions at the public meeting, and 2 written submissions were also received in response to the application. During the public meeting, council inquired as to whether a lot grading plan was submitted in support of the detached accessory building when it was constructed, and staff can confirm that a grading plan was completed in 2014 in support of the NVCA permit. Council also inquired as to whether the second unit would be rented on a short-term basis, and the owner confirmed at the meeting that they have no intention to rent the second unit on a short-term basis, and planning services staff also note that the proposed second unit would not be permitted to be used as short-term accommodation per the town zoning bylaw. The primary concern raised at the public meeting relates to grading and drainage. Engineering Services has confirmed that town staff previously conducted a site visit regarding drainage and possible flooding at 25 Georgian Manor Drive, and based on that site inspection, the water issue appeared to be a blocked overland flow route between the neighboring properties. Engineering Services staff have also noted that a fill permit was not required for the construction of the garage in 2014 or for the subsequent sod replacement. Engineering Services is also advised that the storm sewers along Georgian Manor Drive were cleaned in 2020 as a result of the high water levels in Georgian Bay, and it is anticipated that the current lower lake levels should contribute to the efficiency of these storm sewers. The town's property standards bylaw cannot be applied to address an issue where a neighbor has knowingly or unknowingly flooded another neighbor's property. Staff understand that drainage concerns are between 2 private properties, and as such, the drainage concerns are a civil matter between the 2 property owners. We do note that at the public meeting, the applicant expressed interest in exploring potential opportunities to improve the existing drainage issues when the proposed new septic system is installed. And as such, staff are suggesting that the 2 homeowners consider working together to create a mutually beneficial solution to resolve this issue. And then finally, one of the other written submission received in response to the application was inquiring about the location of the existing septic system on the property. And the existing private septic system is located just south of the single detached dwelling, which was identified on an earlier slide. Next slide, please. So the recommendation before committee this evening is that staff report P 2022-34 be received, and that an amending zoning bylaw to rezone the subject lands from the residential first density zone to the residential first density exception 14 zone be enacted and passed. And this concludes my presentation. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Lindsay. So first of all, we will go to the public for comments or questions with respect to your report. Is there anyone in the gallery wishing to speak at this time? Yes, sir. Come forward and introduce yourself, please.
George Rossiter, 25 Georgian Manor Drive, Collingwood. I'd first like to apologize for my very uncouth presentation. I was here a couple of weeks ago. I didn't really know the protocols, and sorry about that. Anyway, this is a bit of a disappointment for me. I don't quite understand how a neighbor can cause so much disruption to somebody else, and there's no recourse. The town office appears to not be concerned about this. I mean, this fellow is a nice enough guy, but he's raised his property so much. We have 2 sump pumps going almost nonstop in the spring when we never had that before. I sent this office videos of water pouring over our driveway in the spring, and I don't understand why this office, this chamber, can't ask this fellow to put some drainage in. He really should have thought to do that before he raised his property, but he didn't. And apparently that's okay. I just don't understand it. I'd really like someone to explain to me how one neighbor can disrupt another so much, and there's absolutely no recourse, I guess, except going to expensive lawyers and dragging these things out. I don't want to make an enemy with my neighbor. I want to get along, and I don't think a proper drainage system would be an outrageous thing to request or have put in. I just don't understand it. That's all I have to say. I'm really quite disappointed that I have no support from this town in this simple matter. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. So, Mr. Rossiter, I'll just ask staff just to respond to maybe clarify a little more clearly why we cannot entertain or interject within the civil matters. So, Lindsay, can you just respond to Mr. Rossiter, please?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I will certainly do my best, and I'm not sure if Director Slama will be able to add anything further, but my understanding is that the proposal before committee this evening is a zoning bylaw amendment to amend a very specific policy in the zoning bylaw that would allow a second unit to be created on the second floor of an existing detached accessory building. So there's no development per se occurring on the property. My understanding is that the detached accessory building was constructed several years ago. A building permit was issued in support of that, and an NVCA permit was also issued, and a grading permit or a grading plan was submitted in support of that NVCA permit back in 2014. We did consult with engineering services, as I mentioned several times in my presentation, engineering services, because this is certainly somewhat outside of my area of expertise, but they did confirm that a fill permit was not required for the nature of the work that was undertaken. And based on the current language in the property standards bylaw, it's my understanding that there is no mechanism for the town to pursue requiring improvements or changes to the grading as it stands today. I don't know if Director Slama has anything further to add to that, but that is my current understanding.
Thank you very much. That was an excellent response. Director Slama, anything to add?
Thank you, Madam Chair. No, I think Acting Director Ayers, did give a very fulsome answer. And unfortunately, our Acting Manager of Engineering, Stuart West, wasn't able to come this evening to speak to this. But My understanding based on some information that he provided before is that, soil was, Manager Ayers spoke well when staff have been looking at the mechanisms that we can refer to and use. And based on those, there is nothing further that we can do with respect to the fill that was placed on the property. It was placed for the purpose of lawn dressing. And when we look at some of the requirements, one of them is that the lawn needs to be undisturbed for 600 millimeters from the property line, or 0.6 meters. And that appears to have been adhered to. And no ditches or water courses were filled in. So there's no further mechanisms that are tools that staff can use.
Okay. All right. Thank you very much. So what I heard staff saying is that we're encouraging both parties, not just Mr. Rossiter, but both parties to maybe work together and try to find a solution. All right. Someone else from the gallery, Mr. Baines, please come forward. Introduce yourself formally, please.
Thank you. My name is Christopher Baines. I also sit on the Committee of Adjustment. It strikes me that since this is in the purview of the Nottawasaga Valley Conservation Authority, and they issued the permit, as I understand it, for the fill to be put on that on 23. If that's correct, could the town have not asked, or the engineering department not ask, as part of that requirement by NVCA 223, that they also inspect and report back, or perhaps enlarge the drainage ditches on both sides as part of the permit process itself? So in essence, put it back to NVCA to say, if you're going to add this fill, perhaps part of your deliberations ought to be, is the drainage on both sides of the property now suitable to take the water that will result from putting the fill in? Just a thought.
Yeah.
Thank
Okay.
you.
Thank you for that. Staff have heard you, and I won't ask them to respond this evening, but they have the information. Mr. Rossiter, come forward.
By saying that what he wants to do is turn the second floor into a living space, and that's going to require a septic tank and drain weeping tiles, and he's going to have showers and toilets and all these things there running, and that's only going to add more moisture to an already saturated area. So I don't understand why you're saying, okay, we'll give him the permit for the septic tank, but we don't really care about the poor guy downriver. They already said he's having trouble, and it's only going to be that much worse. I don't know why you can't say, sure, put in a septic, put in your weeping tiles, but provide drainage. I don't understand why you say you can't enforce that. I just don't quite get that. I don't get it. I'm sorry.
Right. Okay. All right. We appreciate that. And maybe what we could arrange, if you haven't already done it, is maybe have a meeting offline with staff, and just they can go through it one more time to explain about the mechanisms the municipality has available to it and not, and taking into consideration Mr. Baines' comments as well. And staff will take those back and go forward. Okay. No, thank you. Mayor Hall? Oh, sorry. I'm going to put the motion on before I go to committee members. All right. So if there, is there anybody virtually, Clerk Almas, who would like to speak to this?
Certainly. Thank you, Chair Jeffrey. We do have a couple attendees participating remotely. If you wish to address the staff report, please press the raise your hand feature at the bottom of your screen. Chair Jeffrey.
Okay. Thank you very much, Clerk. All right. So then I will put the motion on the floor, and it is that staff report P 2022-34, proposed zoning bylaw amendment 23 Georgian Manor Drive be received, and that an amending zoning bylaw to rezone the subject lands from the residential first density R1 zone to the residential first density exception 14 R1 14 zone be enacted and passed. May I have a mover and a seconder, please? Vice Chair Doherty and Mayor Hall. And questions, Mayor Hall, I saw your hand.
Thank you, Chair, through you to staff. can I just clarify, in the present day, when staff went back and asked engineering services what work was done, was it simply just to confirm that the work was done, whatever that time period was, and that the opinion at that time was to allow for this to proceed? Can I just confirm that first?
Thank you. Through to Acting Director Lindsay Ayers, please.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Through you to Mayor Hull. Certainly as a result of the public meeting and the drainage concerns raised by the residents, it was understood through Mr. Rossiter's comments at the public meeting that staff had attended the site and he had been speaking with staff. And afterwards, we did follow up with engineering and public works staff to confirm, because we knew it had not been planning services staff meeting with Mr. Rossiter on site. And it was at that time that the engineering services team gave us kind of the summary of what had transpired on the property. But again, the building was constructed, the septic system, the NVCA septic system was issued, or permit was issued in around 2014. And the building permit was issued in around the same time frame. So it was more just getting an understanding of when the development or the construction of the building had occurred, what had resulted in been associated with that in terms of checks and balances on making sure that all of the necessary approvals were obtained when that construction occurred.
Follow up, Mayor Hull?
Yes, and through you to the CAO and to staff, and I say this with the utmost respect, and that is that the issue that I'm trying to get around my head on this particular issue is that work was done and confirmed by staff at one day, and then we've now had a site visit, and there's been some, I'm going to use the word anecdotal unless it's, suggested otherwise, but I'm not convinced that an actual report was done to confirm. And where I'm going with this is that, through no fault, sometimes work is done and it's done in error. And it's not because there was no malicious intent or anything. It was just, numbers don't add up, or the available data at the time wasn't taken into consideration, whatever the case may be. And I'm just wondering, we clearly have an issue where, according to the property owner, you had status quo, then you had this built, and status quo changed. So something had to have changed. And I would just like to know that if we're going to support this, and I am supporting it to move forward to council, but I'd like to know that if we're going to support allowing for this to be turned into a dwelling for actual living space, that the data that we're basing that decision on is actually a report and not an anecdotal site visit. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. CAO Skinner?
Thank you. I just want to make a couple of sort of theoretical comments in response to the good points raised through the chair. Collingwood does not have a site modification bylaw. And that means that our controls for site modification are governed or regulated through some of our other things, our development requirements, the drainage plan that you would submit with a building permit, that kind of thing. And typically, the rules or the legislation or what would happen in a court of law would be that you cannot put water onto a neighbor's property that changes that situation, the situation that existed prior to construction or to those modifications. And when those types of things happen in the absence of municipal rules, it would be an issue between the property owners to address what has happened with, an allowed site modification. NBCA or any conservation authority, their permitting process is related to the protection of people and property from flooding and erosion. So they would have some limited powers to look at water running from one property to another unless there was significant risk involved. So I think this is something that is an important issue to look at. This one may be in the past, and there might be some more opining that we can do prior to council, given the issues that have been raised here by the members and the folks who have spoken. But generally, I think looking at our environmental assessment that will be coming, looking comprehensively at flooding projections and climate change projections through town, as well as a site modification bylaw that we will investigate as part of the trees and tree cover project that's just about to be, I hope, awarded in the next few weeks, would be something that as we mature as a town, council may be interested in asking further questions about and just thinking further about water in built up areas.
Thank you. I appreciate that reply, and I'll leave that. May I ask another question? This question is related to the comment surrounding the STA, and I'd like to ask the question more, not specific to the property, but as a general comment, and then coming back to the property. And that is that I'm aware, and we went through a very painful exercise through the ICBL in coming up with the SCAP program, and we've gone through a couple of exemptions. And prior to the SCAP being adopted, we actually handed out a couple of permits where, in an effort to support homeowners who are living in the property, move forward with renovations, those types of things, we granted some early exemptions. And so I'm aware of one case, for example, where a property owner was given exemption so that they could go ahead and finish a basement, and they had provided all the plans, drawings, et cetera, and were given an exemption. And the whole premise of giving the exemption was so that we could support it from an affordability standpoint. The home's subsequently been sold, and the person doesn't even live in Collingwood anymore, and yet the ICBL is still outstanding in terms of a granted use. It's only one, doesn't matter. It's the point. The comment and why I say I'm coming from a generality, because I'm not speaking to the sincerity of the applicant, but when they say, well, we're not going to use it for the purposes of STAs. Well, I can tell you quite frankly, wearing my other hat, I've talked to a lot of people who say they're not going to use properties for STAs. Anyway, and so can we, for the duration of a property that's under one owner, it would maybe not be transferable, or maybe it is transferable. Can a covenant or something be placed on the property that would ensure, and I'd like to see that written in this case, if that's possible, that the use would be for the intended purpose of the homeowner and not for rental accommodation? Thank you.
Okay, thank you. And that will be information that'll come back to council?
Yeah,
okay.
that's fine.
All
Thank
right.
you.
Great. All right. That's it. Mayor Hall, you're good?
I'm good.
Okay.
Thank you very much.
Acting Director Lindsay Ayres would like to respond.
Great. Thank you, Madam Chair. Just a point of clarification from Mayor Hull. When you say a covenant that the property will not be used for rental accommodation, a significant number of accessory apartments and second units are used for rental accommodation, just not, did you mean short-term rental accommodation?
Yes.
Thank you.
Okay. Great. All right. Vice Chair Doherty.
Thank you. And I'm very glad that Mayor Hall did bring up the matter of site modification and unintended consequences of poor drainage and flooding to adjacent properties, because I was surprised to see in this report that our property standards bylaw does not contemplate any kind of control over drainage. So my question was going to be similar to what Mayor Hall asked. Was I think that this is an important matter, especially as we consider rising waters, climate change, that these kinds of issues with grading and drainage are going to continue, and we need to get these matters under control in some way, or that they can be addressed in some way after it is seen that there is a deficit with an existing property. So I'm just through you to the CAO, I think I'm basically asking for the same thing, but I think it is really important that we pursue this now. Now, then picking up on the mayor's second comment with regard to attaching a covenant on the use of a property for or to assure that it would not be used as a short-term accommodation. Similarly, can a covenant be attached to a property that the issue of drainage and potential impacts on a abutting property can also be addressed as a condition of the, I don't know. Well, I guess there's, it's not a condition of, or could it be a condition of approval? Or is it a legal agreement over and above a planning approval?
I'll let the acting director respond, but she's nodding yes.
Thank you, Madam Chair, through you to Councillor Doherty. Yes, the planning approval before committee this evening is a zoning bylaw amendment. There are no legal agreements or anything anticipated to be registered on title. It would simply be an update to the town zoning bylaw. So exploring the notion of adding covenants to the property is something we would have to have consultation with the town solicitor to determine what options may exist. But I think it may be problematic to impose a covenant as a condition on, we can't do a conditional zoning bylaw amendment.
Okay. CO Skinner?
For both of the suggestions that have been made by one or both of you, from a drainage perspective, we do have the large study that is about to commence, the Part 2 or EA for drainage overall. And I think that would be something where we would look at what are all the opportunities there for managing drainage, bylaw-wise, surcharge-wise, requirements from a development standards perspective. It will look at all those things. And with respect to short-term accommodations, there's a study being carried out by the Bylaw department, and just finished some significant public consultation. And one of the things that they would be looking at is, should we regulate, should we prohibit? And if so, what tools would be in the toolbox for all of those things? And I think that question could fit nicely into that study as well, which is, can something be placed on title? And if so, would it be any, more or less effective or more or less resource intensive than the other tools that they're also looking at? So if you could direct that type of question to those two studies, I think they would A, get answered, and B, be very appropriately placed in those broader reports back to council.
Thank you. All right. So before I get to you, so would we need a motion to have that added then into the report in terms of that request to pursue that, or can staff just simply take it on in terms of? Right. Okay. All right. So I will ask that Mayor Hull firstly take the opportunity to do a notice of motion, if you so wish, with respect to the covenant on the short-term accommodation, and then I'll have moved Councillor Doherty for a notice of motion on a covenant for the drainage. You so wish.
I'm happy. Can I just, a question of clarification would be, happy to provide a notice of motion, but I'm just trying to figure out what am I proposing the notice of motion to? My issue is I'd like to see something happen that is specific to this that could be incorporated with policy going forward. The recommendation appears to be, no, this is the staff report. We're moving forward to council for approval, and therefore my notice of motion would go to something for months out, which is good as well, but it doesn't tie. Well, we would then make the approval first, and then some policy will be applied at a later date. That's all.
Yeah, we can. So is there an opportunity that we need to do both? We can do the amendment because we already talked about having the response to your question coming with the report on October 17th.
If I
Anything above and
could,
beyond
to
that?
make it as wide as possible, maybe my notice would just simply to have a legal opinion drafted specific to this property as it relates to putting a covenant in place that would prohibit the singular STA use. If the property owner wants to rent it out on a seasonal or annual, that's something that's an allowed use. I have no issue with that. So, yeah, that would be the notice.
Okay, all right. Thank you for that.
Yeah.
They're wanting it as part of zoning. Or through the chair, the zoning approval could be conditional if we receive confirmation from legal that we could add such a covenant. So in that case, it wouldn't be a notice of motion because we'd have to do the investigation prior to add it. So it would be an amendment to this motion.
Which is what I had to start with. Okay. All right. We're going to leave it as a proposed amendment, and yours is a proposed amendment, and we will get the answers in time for council. And if there's something we need to do further beyond that, we will do that. Do you still need a motion for those two amendments then? Yep. Okay. So, Mayor Hall, you want to word that once more as an amendment, please?
Thank you. I'd like to just simply table an amendment that would, through staff, request that we have a legal opinion to the ability to apply a covenant specific to this bylaw to ensure that an STA use cannot be used. And if I may, I mean, all we're asking somebody to do really
All the rules.
is actually just sign off that they're following the rule. And I'm just asking simply because, and I want to make it crystal clear to the property owner, I am not singling you out. What I am singling out is the repeated times that I have seen where somebody has said before us, this is what I'm doing, and then they do the opposite. That's all.
Okay. All right. So that amendment is moved by Mayor Hall. Do we have a seconder? Vice Chair Doherty, yes. Okay. Any other comment specific to that amendment? Seeing none, I'll call the vote on the amendment. Those in favor, and that is carried unanimously. Second amendment,
Okay.
Vice Chair Doherty.
Thank you. That with regard to the zoning bylaw application for this property, that a legal opinion be sought as to whether a covenant can be placed on the property owner to ensure that the grading and drainage on the property is implemented in such a way as to prevent excessive or recurrent ponding of water on the adjacent property.
Do I have a seconder for that amendment, please? Councillor Hamlin. Any further discussion on the amendment? All those in favor, and that is carried unanimously. Thank you very much. Any other comments? I think Councillor Hamlin, yes, you had some. Go ahead.
Thank you. Other than the drainage issue, and of course I'm supported Mayor Hall's motion also about an SDA restriction. I'm content with the zoning bylaw change. I wanted to comment on the discussion briefly had about property standards bylaw and civil remedies, because to my mind, a civil remedy is where one has damages and they're seeking some remedy through the court for that. Property standards bylaws, to my mind, is more an issue where we ask the municipality to make sure that every property owner is maintaining its property properly, and that includes drainage. And so I had a look at our property standards bylaw today, and I did see there was a clause that provides that no, I'll just paraphrase here, no storm water drainage shall be directed or discharged onto a neighbor's property. So one motion I would like to put on the floor is that the legal opinion that Councillor Doherty's just brought forward also add a view as to whether that provision would act in this instance to prevent or to require the owner to take care of his drainage problem. And I'll come back to that in a minute, because the last thing I wanted to say is that independently of this property, if that clause I mentioned doesn't fix the problem, we need to fix the problem. Because I am, do not believe that our neighbors, hoods where there are issues like this have to go to the courts with the money, the delay, the lack of really proper remedy that a civil court would give. And some property standards bylaw clearly address this, and ours could address it if we wanted to. And then we would simply have, orders from our property standards officers directing people to fix the problem. So I would like to see that in place. And not only am I mindful of Mr. Rossiter's problem, but we have heard about residents in the Sunset Point area who are having this same problem when one resident changes the grade on their property so that all of a sudden storm drainage is ending up on their neighbors. So I think that this is a good avenue for a town to be taking a stand on. So separately from this property, I wanted to suggest a motion also that we ask staff to bring forward a report on amendments to our property standards bylaw to address this type of drainage issue.
I think that will be, that second piece will be for later.
Under other business?
Because
Okay.
it won't impact the zoning bylaw.
Can do it then.
here
Thank you.
specifically.
Yep.
But your first one, you wanted to amend to ask for an
Yes.
additional opinion on whether the clause within the property standards would assist the resident with respect to the water discharge onto his property. Is that correct?
Yes, that's right.
Okay, thank you. So do I have a second for Councillor Hamlin's? Ready? Okay. Any further question on that amendment? There's none. All those in favor? Carried unanimously. No other discussion. Then we'll call the vote on the motion as amended. All those in favor? And that is carried unanimously. Thank you very much. So next up, oh, sorry. Yep.
I did want to make just one caution. We are going to do our best as staff to make sure that this is ready for council on the 17th, but it is a pretty quick turnaround. We'll be posting the materials on Thursday. So if we're not able to get the legal opinions in the report, we'll make sure that you understand the status. Our key lawyer is in an OLT hearing this week. So we'll do our best.
Yep. Okay. Understood. Okay. Thank you. All right. So moving on, that brings us to 6.2 P 2022-35, approval and authorization bylaw to execute a site plan control agreement, 380 First Street, Crozier Consulting Engineers Office Building. And I think we're going to look to our acting director again for set us up for the discussion. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Staff Report P 2022-35 is a report regarding a proposed site plan to facilitate a new commercial office building to be used as the Crozier Consulting Engineers head office at 380 First Street. Community Planner Wukash will be providing an overview of the proposal, and I also understand that the property owner, Mr. Vince Sakuchi, is attending virtually this evening should members of the committee have specific questions for him. And with that, I will turn it over to Community Planner Wukash to provide his presentation. Thank you.
Thank you. Welcome.
Good evening, Madam Chair, committee members and members of the public. I'll be presenting Staff Report P 2022-35 regarding site plan control for 380 First Street tonight, and we'll give you a brief overview of the application and the recommendation. Next slide, please. So this is a 2018 aerial photograph of the subject lands, which are located on the south side of First Street and west of Walnut Street. The surrounding land uses include residential uses to the south and commercial uses to the east, west, and north. Next slide, please. The pre-consultation meeting for the development proposal occurred in April of 2021, and a formal site plan control application was first made in July of 2021. As you saw on the previous slide, there was a previous car wash and restaurant building that has now been demolished to make way for the new proposed construction of the office building. In terms of water capacity allocation, the development proposal consists of a 3-story commercial office building that will use no more water than the previous uses on the site, which has been identified as being 18 single detached dwelling unit equivalents, which we'll term SDUs. And an ICBL exemption was granted by council on March 21st of 2022. Next slide, please. This is a Google Street View image of the subject lands from Walnut Street south of First Street prior to the demolition of the building on the property, which contained the restaurant and self-serve car wash. You can note the uncontrolled access along the Walnut Street frontage, the predominant hard surfaces on the site, and the general lack of landscaping on the site. Next slide, please. This is an overall site plan proposed for the subject property, which demonstrates an improvement to the former uses on the site and the current vacant site condition. To orient the viewer, First Street is on the left-hand side of this screen. So the site plan shows the building addressing both the First Street and the Walnut Street frontages, with the main building entrance being located at the corner at the intersection. The development proposal consists of a 2,000 square meter, 3-story office building on the site, which is intended to be used as the Crozier Consulting Engineers head office. Vehicular access would be from Walnut Street, and surface parking, including accessible and bicycle spaces, are proposed for the building. There's also outdoor amenity areas proposed at grade and in a 3rd floor private open air terrace in the building. Next slide, please. To provide a better sense of what the proposal will look like once constructed, the next few slides provide some architectural renderings of the proposed development. So this slide shows an architectural rendering from the intersection of First and Walnut, showing the main entrance at the corner with an atrium inside the building at the corner as well. And the rendering illustrates the unique architecture and some of the sustainable features, such as low carbon building design, which is constructed from mass timber and glass. The building also features energy efficient design, including mechanical systems, plumbing fixtures, building materials, and daylighting. And there's also a green roof proposed for the building. Next slide, please. This is a second rendering looking north along Walnut Street at the back of the building. Next slide, please. This side illustrates building elevations from the 2 main street frontages. So on the left side of the screen would be the elevation from First Street, the right side being the Walnut Street elevation. And the next slide shows the other 2 elevations as well, the left side being the elevation facing the parking area proposed at the south side of the site, and the west being the elevation that you would see from Boston Pizza restaurant. Next slide, please. This is an excerpt of the landscaping plans for the site, which shows landscaping along the street frontages and public realm on First and Walnut Street, as well as within the site. Extensive landscaping is proposed across the site with a proposed mature tree canopy that meets the 30% requirement in the town's urban design manual. There are significant planting beds and trees proposed between the building and First and Walnut Streets. And the Walnut Street frontage will see significant improvements abutting the building and parking area, with the boulevard being reinstated, sodded, and planted with street trees. Next slide, please. In terms of planning policy analysis, the proposed development is consistent and in conformity with all of the applicable provincial and municipal planning policy and regulatory instruments as outlined in the staff report. The property is appropriately zoned for the proposed development and represents infill on a vacant lot within the existing built boundary of the town. If approved, this development would contribute toward achieving a complete community with compact built form and provide new economic and employment opportunities for a local business. Next slide, please. The site plan control agreement will include all of these standard clauses typically found in the standard template site plan control agreement. There are a number of special terms and conditions that are being refined by staff and town solicitor. Once the site plan control agreement has been finalized to the satisfaction of the acting director, planning, and the town solicitor, the agreement would be forwarded to the mayor and clerk for execution. Financial and security considerations for the site plan control agreement are identified on the slide and would also include the conveyance of a 6x6 meter daylight triangle at the corner of the intersection. Next slide, please. So in conclusion, staff recommend today that Development Operation Committee recommend to Council to receive the report, to approve site plan application number D11621, subject to the owner entering into the site plan control agreement with the town to the satisfaction of the acting director and town solicitor, and also to enact the authorization bylaw to execute the site plan control agreement. So thank you for the opportunity to present this to you today, and I'm happy to answer any questions that you might have.
Very much, Community Planner Wukash. So first of all, if I could ask the clerk to ask if there's anyone online who wishes to speak to this item.
Thank you, Chair Jeffrey. Yes, we have Vince Sakuchi would like to address the committee regarding this staff report.
Mr. Sakuchi, please go ahead.
Hello.
Hello.
They're good. Getting a bit of feedback. Sorry about that. Madam Chair, member of the committee, my name is Vince Sakuchi. I'm with NewTac Holdings. I'll be very brief. NewTac and Croziers have been involved in Collingwood for decades, so I'm not going to provide any details on our history. So I'm principally here just to ask any or answer any questions. I can't improve on the presentation that Nathan made, but questions may arise. I would, however, like to take just a brief moment in this sort of public forum to thank all of the staff, because you all know how many people are involved in reviewing these applications. And I just want to take this on behalf of our team, to thank all the municipal staff, specifically Nathan and Lindsay, for shepherding the various components through the process. And just say thank you very much. I'll answer any questions that you may have.
All right. Thank you for that. So is there anyone else wishing to speak to the matter tonight? Okay. Seeing none, then we will put the motion on the floor. It's that staff report P 2022-35, approval and authorization bylaw to execute a site plan control agreement, 380 First Street, the Crozier Consulting Engineers Office Building, be received, and the site plan application file number D11621 be approved, subject to the owner entering into a site plan control agreement with the town to the satisfaction of the acting director, planning, and town solicitor. And further, that an authorization bylaw to execute a site plan control agreement for the development of an office building at 380 First Street be enacted and passed. Can I have a mover and a seconder, please? Councillor Hamlin, Vice Chair Doherty. Questions from the committee members? Councillor Doherty, Vice Chair Doherty, sorry.
Thank you. Actually, not a question, but just a comment that this is indeed a very attractive project for our community, and I could even hazard a guess that this would up the bar for commercial applications in the community. So congratulations to the proponent and to staff. And then also just a comment that generally I'm not in support of cash in lieu of parkland. But in the case of this particular project, there is clearly a significant enhancement to the landscaping and green space provided on this lot. So I would suggest that have no concern
Okay. Thank you.
there. Thank you.
Councillor Ham.
Hi, thank you, Madam Chair. Just briefly, I just wanted to comment that I'm so thrilled to see a project of this caliber being proposed for this high-profile location. And some of the things I noted when I was looking through this report was, and I just wanted to say how great these things were: energy efficient design, the green roof, 35% landscape open space, where only 10% is required. And lastly, I'll just mention, well, maybe two things: the 10 bicycle spots for parking and the 10-meter buffer strip where this project will abut an existing residential area. I thought that was a great nod to the neighborhood. So thank you very much.
Okay, thank you. I just have one question. I would agree with my colleagues' comments in terms of a very quality upping the bar presentation. My question is, under the urban design standards, I thought at some point on First Street we were going to try to shift to buildings on the street with the parking behind. And I remember Brooke McElroy referring to that also coming out of the waterfront master plan in terms of the evolution of First Street and how much better it was to have the parking in behind, particularly such a stunning building. So I guess my question is, was there something prohibitive on the site that didn't allow us to put the parking behind? Sorry?
Oh, through you.
On the
through you, Madam
side.
Chair.
It's on the side, and then did I look the wrong way? Sorry, Mr. Saguchi, just give me a minute to get my bearings. I'm just going to ask staff to go back to the picture, because what I saw the parking on the side with the entrance from Walnut Street, kind of the lot split in half and half.
Madam
just
Chair, I
need
can I can help with that question.
Thank you.
I made a point of highlighting on the one slide. This image is a bit tricky because it turns the site plan 90 degrees. So we're looking at the site from the west vantage point right now. So First Street is actually on the left side of the screen. So the building does front right onto First Street, and so the top of this image is actually Walnut Street. So the building has in fact done exactly what the town has hoped it would do in being placed as close to the frontage along the whole of First Street as possible, with some building frontage on Walnut as well, with all of the parking accessed from Walnut Street and not visible from First Street.
Makes it even more perfect. I guess I just assumed the longer frontage was representing what was on First Street from the pictures we'd taken before toward the west, which showed all the parking and then the building. So I just translated that into this without paying attention to probably the really, really, really small street references that are in these pictures that get circulated. So thank you for that, for clarifying. So I'm really happy with that. All right. So if there's no further comments, I have a mover and a seconder. All those in favor? That is carried unanimously. Thank you very much. So that takes us to 6.3, and you were circulated some hard copies, because this is where we may have to follow the bouncing ball just a little bit, because trying to make the discussion with respect to these recommendations a little easier. So first of all, then, I am going to ask planning if they have a summary they'd like to present to us with respect to 6.3, please.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So when it comes to permits for alterations to heritage structures, there's been a long-standing balance of consistency with the consideration of any site-specific circumstances that may warrant a special deviation. And this has resulted in a history of both approving and refusing applications involving the painting of masonry in particular, which has led to some confusion as to why one property owner is permitted to paint masonry while another is not. Furthermore, recent events concerning the painting of masonry at 12 4th Street and the associated appeal to the Ontario Land Tribunal have highlighted the need for applying a consistent and fair approach to heritage permit applications, as well as improving knowledge at the council level for heritage property owners and the general public about how decisions are made on heritage permits that are similar in nature. Subsequent to the July 26, 2022 Heritage Committee meeting, the town received 6 heritage permit applications, including 1 retroactive application for the painting of masonry on properties located within the Collingwood Downtown Heritage Conservation District. These applications were considered by the Heritage Committee at its meeting on September 26th, and for the reasons mentioned, staff elected not to exercise delegated authority, but rather summarize the scenarios and recommendations in this report with the goal of furthering understanding and communication around all of the factors that go into decisions on heritage permits. Staff Report P 2022-36 is seeking Council's consideration and decision on these 6 heritage permit applications in particular, as well as a general endorsement of staff's approach to the review and issuance of heritage permits for the painting of masonry when exercising delegated authority going forward. The endorsement of this general approach will provide more confidence for staff, heritage property owners, and other stakeholders. Please note that while staff have made professional recommendations in this report, Council may choose to grant, deny, or defer any of the heritage permits before you this evening at their sole discretion and in a way that may or may not align with the rationale presented in this report. And I would now ask Community Planner Teakle to provide his presentation of the report. Thank you.
Yep, thank you. Welcome, Planner Teakle.
Thank you. Good evening, committee members. This is a presentation for Staff Report P 2022-36 regarding various heritage permit applications for painting of masonry in the Heritage District. This presentation will provide a brief overview of those applications and the associated recommendations. We can just hold on this slide, please. So over the course of the late summer, 6 heritage permit applications for painting of masonry were received for properties within the Collingwood Downtown Heritage Conservation District, designated under Part 4 of the Ontario Heritage Act. The locations of those properties are shown on the map on this slide, with the Heritage District highlighted in yellow. The permits were considered by the Heritage Committee at their September 26th meeting, and the subject properties are 14 Huron Street, 32 Simcoe Street, 64 Hume Street, 66 Huron Street, 72 First Street, and 280-290 Huron Street. At the start of the September 26th Heritage Committee meeting, staff walked Heritage Committee members through the interpretation of the district plan that informed the staff recommendations on the agenda prior to hearing any of the heritage permit deputations that day. Before each individual deputation, staff provided their specific recommendation and reiterated the interpretation informing the recommendation. Heritage Committee was also advised on September 26th that the report before you this evening would be forthcoming. Commentary from the Heritage Committee on the interpretation was in agreement that establishing consistency was important. This report was sent to the Heritage Committee members before or when it was published, and no further comments have been received from them to date. Staff greatly appreciate the work and recommendations of the Heritage Committee and recognize that members are tasked with providing advice to Council on a range of often complex, nuanced, and context-specific applications. The Collingwood Heritage Committee's role is an advisory capacity, and while the recommendations to Council and staff are valuable, the decision to issue or refuse a permit ultimately resides with Council or staff in accordance with Bylaw 2022-037. While heritage permit decisions are all assessed on their individual merits and do not set precedents, in order to provide the highest level of certainty for heritage property owners, Council and staff should endeavor to ensure that there is consistency in the decisions made on similar proposals, while recognizing that the specific context or the information provided may result in a decision that differs from other seemingly similar applications. By bringing this report forward to Council, the intent is to enhance understanding of different approaches to multiple applications that are similar, but where the resulting recommendations of staff and Heritage Committee sometimes vary based on the site-specific nature within the context of the Heritage Conservation District Plan. Staff are also seeking to confirm Council's endorsement of staff's general consistent approach to the review and issuance of heritage permits for painting of masonry in order to ensure public and political confidence in exercising staff delegated authority in the future. So with regard to the painting of masonry in the Heritage District, there's been a consistent municipal interpretation of the Collingwood Downtown Heritage Conservation District Plan to permit repainting of already painted masonry and not the painting of unpainted masonry, regardless of the age of the building or the type of the masonry in question. The district plan does strongly encourage removal of paint from masonry, especially historic masonry, where it has been applied in the past, and staff and the Heritage Committee have experienced success in encouraging, supporting removals. This should continue to be the ultimate goal for all historic masonry in the district that is painted. Similarly, for non-historic masonry buildings in the district, it is the objective of the district plan to ensure that such properties are not altered in a way that further detracts from the character of the district. As such, painting of non-historic masonry would move these properties further out of character of the district, whereas repainting already painted surfaces in a color from the approved heritage color palette does not shift the state of the property in relation to the goals of the district and ensures ease of maintenance. Staff recommendations in this report uphold this interpretation and the desire for consistency and equal treatment of like applications where there are no extenuating circumstances identified. Next slide, please. So the next few slides are going to walk through each of those 6 applications a bit more in more detail. So the first application is 14 Huron Street, which is located on the south side of the street. The applicant is seeking to repaint the painted concrete block masonry from the existing dark blue to a heritage black. The concrete block dates to approximately 1930. Staff recommended approval to the Heritage Committee on the basis that the surface is already painted. The committee recommended deferral subject to receipt of information to investigate potential for removal of the paint. Staff are recommending that council approve this application. Next slide, please. This is the rear west side of 32 Simcoe Street, also known as Mogul's Bar and Grill, facing the adjacent laneway. The applicant is seeking to repaint the non-historic concrete block portion of the wall, currently painted a clay red, to a heritage black. Staff recommended approval of the application, which was supported by the Heritage Committee. Staff are recommending council support the Heritage Committee recommendation to approve the permit that includes a simple condition to prep the wall for the new coat of paint. Next slide, please. This is 64 Hume Street, located on the south side of the street at the intersection with St. Marie Street. The applicant is seeking to repaint the stone look concrete block veranda piers, which are the bases of the pillars, from the existing dark blue to a heritage gray. Staff recommended approval of the application, which was supported by the Heritage Committee. And so staff are recommending that council support the Heritage Committee recommendation and approve the permit. Next slide, please. This is 66 Huron Street, located on the west side of the street, just north of 2nd Street. The applicant is seeking to repaint the storefront's brick pilasters, which are the brick columns at the sides, from the current dark green to a heritage black, consistent with the rest of the storefront. Staff recommended approval to the Heritage Committee, and the committee recommended deferral subject to investigation regarding removal. Staff are recommending council approve this application. And I'd also like to note a typo on page 9 of the report in the analysis section, where there is the heading 14 Huron Street and 64 Hume Street. That heading should read 14 Huron Street and 66 Huron Street and refer to 66 Huron Street in the body of that section too, rather than 64 Hume. Next slide, please. This is 72 First Street, located on the south side of First Street and is the most western property along First Street included in the district. The applicant is seeking a retroactive approval for the white primer that has been applied to the red brick masonry on the east and west facades, as well as approval to paint the masonry in heritage white. Staff recommended refusal of the application, which was supported by the Heritage Committee. So staff are recommending council support the Heritage Committee's recommendation to refuse the permit. An order to discontinue work was issued by bylaw enforcement when the works without a permit were identified by staff, and no further alterations have occurred since the order was made. Next slide, please. And the final application is 280-290 Huron Street, specifically the Royal Bank building located on the west side of the street. The applicant is seeking to paint all the concrete block imitation stone along the base of the building in a heritage gray. Staff recommended refusal for the application to the Heritage Committee, and the Heritage Committee recommended approval subject to the satisfaction of staff, receipt in writing from a masonry expert, an opinion with regard to the suitability of the proposed paint product, as the committee had raised concerns at the meeting about intrusion of water into the existing block and adherence of the paint over the long term. So staff are recommending that council refuse this application, or the permit for this application. Next slide, please. So in summary, the staff recommendations for council are to deem the heritage permit applications complete and issue notice of receipt to the applicants, approve the September 26, 2022 recommendations of the Town of Collingwood's Heritage Committee for 32 Simcoe Street, 64 Hume Street, and 72 First Street, which would result in the approval of heritage permits for 32 Simcoe Street and 64 Hume Street, and the refusal of a heritage permit for 72 First Street. Approve the heritage permit applications for 14 Huron Street and 66 Huron Street. Refuse the heritage permit application for 280-290 Huron Street, and direct staff to issue or refuse heritage permits in accordance with council's decision within 90 days of serving the applicant with a notice of receipt. And lastly, that council endorse staff's interpretation of the Collingwood Downtown Heritage Conservation District Plan contained in report P 2022-36 with regard to painting or repainting of masonry, and support future staff delegated heritage permit approvals in accordance with Bylaw 2022-037 for repainting of already painted masonry. Next slide, please. And lastly, in terms of next steps, subject to council's decision, those next steps would include serving the owners of the notice of receipt, followed by their heritage permit or notice of refusal. The owner may appeal a refused permit or an issued permit with conditions within 90 days to the Ontario Land Tribunal. If no appeal is submitted, the owner can proceed in accordance with the conditions of an issued permit. The town may undertake further enforcement actions with regard to 72 First Street should the retroactive permit be refused by council. And I'm happy to answer any questions. Thank you.
For the report, I'm just going to go to the public first. Councillor Doherty. Is there anyone wishing to speak to this item?
Thank you, Chair Jeffrey. We do have Harley Valentine would like to address the staff report of previous deputant.
Okay, thank you. Valentine, please go ahead.
Thank you. In response to the report, and also in response to Vic Sarcucci's exceptional vision that he's putting forward for First Street as far as the transformation of that strip goes, we are in fact in a historic neighborhood. That's not lost on us. And we are actually at the gateway to that neighborhood, which is quite exciting. And I think that, you know, as I mentioned in my opening deputation, I hope that council today looks at the refusal in front of them in greater context, that this is what we would call a soft site. Not a typical soft site, as it has a tenant and it'll have retail life and vitality, but that it will eventually be redeveloped and for a higher and better use. And it seems a bit difficult for me to swallow that this is not a heritage property that will eventually have a demolition permit pulled for brick that is internally painted, an interim in a very short moment in time. So I just want again, once press upon that context and our best efforts to really revitalize this building and the hundreds of thousands of dollars we're spending to convert it to an exceptional food and beverage destination. And we see complying with the heritage Pantone of paint on the two sides, and also the improvement of the board and batten to really be a strong complement to that First Street corridor. So I'll just leave it there for council's contemplation. Thank you very much.
No, thank you. All right. If there's no one else wishing to speak to this, then you have a question specific to the report. So what I'm going to do is going to do the first paragraph, ask to receive for information, and you can ask your questions on that. So I will read that in, and that first paragraph is the staff report P 2022-36, various heritage permit applications for painting masonry be received. A mover and a seconder, Vice Chair Doherty, Mayor Hull, and questions through to staff on the report. Councillor Doherty, go ahead.
Thank you. So my first question is with regard to the two applications for which the Heritage Committee deferred. So I'm just trying to get a sense of the timelines for that deferral. So did staff investigate the potential for removal of paint on 14 Huron Street, and also 280, 290? Did staff investigate the suitability of the paint product before they made their final decision to approve or refuse, respectively?
Okay, thank you. So we'll put that through to Community Planner Tico, please.
Thank you. So through the chair to Councillor Doherty, with regards to 14 Huron Street and 66 Huron Street, where the committee deferred for further information to investigate removal, staff did encourage when both of those applications were being looked into by the owners of those properties to look into removal, and provided information with regards to the products that have been successful to removing paint in other locations throughout the district, but they wanted to pursue painting after having looked into that and move forward to the committee at the September meeting. With 280, 290 Huron Street, that one was a bit of a last minute addition to the agenda. It came up close to the publication of that agenda. Staff did encourage them to provide as much detail as they could on the product being used in the approach, but based on what was provided, the staff recommendation was refusal.
Okay, thank you. If just one more question, if I
Sure.
may.
Yep.
And this is with regard to 72 First Street. So there is agreement here between staff and the Heritage Committee to refuse the permit. Just to clarify, the painting of the front or the First Street facing facade will be permitted to continue. Is that correct? It's only the brick that is in question.
Through the chair, that's correct.
Yep.
Thank you. And secondly, by refusing the permit for 72 First Street, would the applicant be required to remove the paint from the brick, or just the permit is refused and that's it? No further painting of the brick?
Community Planner Tico.
Through the chair, so if the application for 72 First Street is refused, they would have the ability to appeal that decision to the Ontario Land Tribunal. So the tribunal may make a different decision from whatever decision council ultimately makes. So there could be that outcome that perhaps ultimately allows it to stay. But there's also the ability for the town, should council refuse a permit, to pursue further enforcement actions. And through that process, there may be the ability for the town to, through enforcement, have a restoration undertaken.
Thank you. Any follow-up?
No, thank you.
Okay. Carol, do you have a question brewing? No? You're good?
Thank you. I appreciate the report, and specific to 66 Huron Ontario, I appreciate the fact that staff have suggested to approve this particular painting, and I would like to know if our report to the Heritage Committee, if the Heritage Committee was even aware of the fact that the building was painted white. Then the prior tenant came in. I don't know if it was the building owner or the tenant. I'm going to assume it was the tenant. Painted it green overnight. And that was the cannabis shop that just closed. And now we have a new tenant that has moved from First to Huron Ontario, and they're simply looking to rectify something that's already been in place for decades. Was that imparted on the Heritage Committee? Or are they just simply looking at this that, they think that, in their opinion, that they would prefer to see brick restored to its natural element as opposed to a painted element. So that's my first question.
Okay, thank you. Can you enlighten us on that, Committee Planner Tico, from the meeting?
Yes, so through the chair to Mayor Hall, the Heritage Committee was aware that those pilasters, so the brick portion on either side of the storefront at 66 here, Ontario, have been painted multiple times and for quite some time have been in that condition. And so based on the staff's interpretation and recommendation to them, the recommendation from staff was to permit repainting of an existing painted masonry surface. As noted previously to Councillor Doherty through her question, staff did encourage them to investigate removal of that paint. And they had looked into that and determined that it wouldn't be feasible for them at this time, and they weren't willing to undertake those costs.
Okay, thank you. Follow up, Mayor Hall?
So the Heritage Committee was aware that this building had been painted twice.
It appears.
Comment. I'll
Yes,
leave it at that.
It appears so.
you.
All right.
And then, if I may, specific to 72 First Street. This is a comment, an assumption that I'm making, and that is that it would be interesting. I appear this is another instance of retroactive, but the building has been deemed as a building that has really no historical architectural character or lends itself in an architectural manner to the neighborhood. And even if it was deemed by the current owner that they were going to maintain this for an extended period of time, and there were no plans to, in fact, potentially merge the properties and build something much more substantive, I mean, would there not be a room or an opportunity for some leniency to say, look, we do understand that it's within the district, but we also want to, we've got somebody who tonight, although I've never heard of them, have been described as an artisanal artist as it relates to pizza. That's what I want to see in this community when it comes to architecture. And we just saw it in the prior presentation further down the road on First Street. We've seen it in the architecture as it relates to our water treatment plant, to what Parkbridge did, and we're seeing that extension. And this is a prime opportunity where a successful restaurant was closed due to retirement, I believe, and we've got new ownership who are looking just to simply breathe life into the building and into the use for a short period of time. They could do what other buildings have done. We just finally approved a demolition permit for the property on St. Paul that sat vacant for years in a dilapidated state. Nobody commented on that. And there are other examples to that effect. So I think that this is an example where some leniency could be expressed to the owner, maybe with an understanding from a contractual, understanding that certain criteria have to be made in the event that, for example, they didn't move forward with their project within a time period. Whether that was affected by these ICBL or not, I have no idea. But the point being is that there are much greater things at stake here than just the paint on the side of this particular building. And I just would suggest that perhaps this is an example where we could say, look, we understand that from a retroactive perspective, whether there was a misunderstanding or there was just a blatant, disregard for the bylaws that are in place, that this would be an opportunity just to say, look, we understand that you are investing in the community, that you are looking to create an opportunity on a short-term basis until you're prepared to move forward with the long-term vision. If anybody wants to do their homework and understand who the building owners are and look at their portfolio, I think that they will be impressed at the fact that we are dealing with somebody who's investing in the community, who has a strong track record, not only in new builds, but the adaptation of sites, whether they be in a heritage concept or context or new. So I would just leave that. I would like to see that particular one be approved with conditions. It either has to be removed, which I'm not in favor, or it has to be moved forward so we get past the whitewashing that's been done today and actually paint it to its completion, similar to the 25 to 30 other buildings within the core, whether they were approved or not, that are painted. Thank you.
Okay. Councillor Hamlin.
Thank you. With respect to 72 First Street, I have to say that I went back and forth in my mind on what the right answer was here, because it is so easy to say a rule is a rule is a rule. But I am not going to repeat what Mayor Hall has said, but I do agree with everything he has said. This is a property that a respected developer has bought with big plans, and the option, other than opening a restaurant and bringing some life to that area for the period of time it will take before a development can move forward, is to demolish it, really. And that wouldn't suit the property either. So anyway, as I say, I'm not going to repeat what Mayor Hull says, but I am in full agreement. With respect to 280 Huron Street, I have a question through you, Madam Chair, for our staff. I understand that the painting may not solve the problem that's been identified, but I don't understand how this owner can then move forward. He's not allowed to paint it. What is the option for that owner if we were to adopt staff's recommendation?
Thank you. So through to Community Planner Tico, please.
Through the chair to Councillor Hamlin. So they couldn't, it appears that a certain amount of the actual color coating on the top of that has started to deteriorate and come off. So they would need to look at actually replacing pieces of that stonework, if not all of it. There's also staining in certain elements. So there's certain cleaning applications that they could investigate in places. So those would be the two alternative options that come to mind, as opposed to applying paint.
I see. So if I could summarize then, what the staff is suggesting is, rather than a quick fix to make it look better in the short term, the owner should fix the issue. And I guess we have that authority through the heritage rules. Is that correct?
Community Planner Tico?
So through the chair to Councillor Hamlin, they would need to apply for another heritage permit for a different proposal. And so we're dealing with this one with regards to painting, but there are property standards bylaws as well as it relates to maintenance of properties.
Okay, thank you. I understand. Those are my questions.
Okay, all right. Okay, so we've had a lot of conversation overall on the report as it's been received. I have a mover and a seconder. I'm going to call the question on receiving the report, and then we'll move into voting on the other properties as we go along. Okay, all those in favor of receiving the report? And that is carried unanimously. Thank you. So as we move through, I'm going to jump to paragraph 3 in terms of individual properties, and they've been categorized between joint recommendations that are similar, that staff and committee have the same recommendation, those that they are similar but they have a condition, and then those that are being deferred or requesting to be deferred. And I'm just going to clarify with Clerk Almus before I proceed here that the recommendations were all worded in terms of adopting the Heritage Committee's recommendation. So if you wish to change those, you're going to have to defeat the Heritage Committee's recommendation and then put the staff's recommendation.
Could you say that again?
All of these have been worded that we recommend that Council approves the September 26th recommendations of the Collingwood Heritage Committee. So if we are wanting to move to the staff recommendation, you're going to have to defeat the committee recommendation first. Am I correct on that? I'm going to wait for the clerk's response and I'll go to you.
Certainly. This is actually Community Planner Tico's report. I believe some of them are in support of the committee's recommendation where there was agreement, and where there's not, it is the staff recommendation that's being put forward.
So my problem, though, is all of these begin with, and further that Council approves the September 26 recommendations of the Town of Collingwood's Heritage Committee, because that's as paragraph 3 was worded in originally.
all three of those are staff recommendations and the committee's recommendations.
Okay. Yeah, I have that there, but I'm just a little worried when I get to the other ones where they're not similar. The wording was the committee's recommendations. Even though the intent is that we get to staffs. I'll go to Mayor Hall first. You're going to help me?
I would like to offer the following, and that is that, and I say it again with respect, we've received the report. I would like to table paragraph 3 to defeat it, and then have you or one of us put each property back on the floor individually, and the four of us can determine we've got the information in terms of the recommendations from the various sources, and we can come to our own conclusion as to how we're going to move each property forward. But to take the ambiguity out of it, just
Or not, or just vote on them each individually.
Okay. Okay, because that's what I had done. I'd broken them out individually by categorically, but my problem is the wording. Okay, we'll keep going and we'll get ourselves out of it somehow going forward. All right, so the first one is, and further that council approves the September 26 recommendations of the Town of Collingwood's Heritage Committee for 64 Hume Street approved, 72 First Street refused, and 32 Simcoe Street, including the condition imposed by the committee. Staff and committee recommendations are the same for those first three. Does anyone require further severance as opposed to voting for these in a block?
I'm good with 64. And then
So we will sever the three of these out then. Yeah. Yes. Yeah. 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 All right. So the first one we are voting on is 64 Hume Street, which is approved, similar to staff and committee recommendations. They have the same recommendation. I have a mover and a seconder for that, please. Councillor Doherty and Mayor Hall. Any questions on what we're voting on specific to this one property? Seeing none. All those in favor? That's carried unanimously. So that is 64 Hume Street approved. Next up is 72 First Street, and further that council approves the September 26 recommendation of the Town of Collingwood's Heritage Committee for 72 First Street, which is refused, recommendation of refusal by both staff and the committee. Can I have a mover and a seconder for that? Seeing none.
well, given the number of people around the table, I'd be prepared to put it on, knowing full well will then be putting up my red card to vote against it.
I don't think that's a good idea.
But you don't have the numbers, so.
As the, yeah.
Support it. If you
Yes.
have a seconder, you're okay. Opposite on the floor.
If there's no one to do that, we'll just move on to the opposite, which would be that further that council not approve the September 26 recommendation of the Town of Collingwood's Heritage Committee for 72 First Street, the refused recommendation similar by both staff and the committee. And approve it. Yeah. Okay, that's moved by Mayor Hall, seconded by Vice Chair Doherty. Any further comments? All right, seeing none, I'll call the vote. All those in favor? And that is carried unanimously. All right, 72 First Street. And then 32 Simcoe Street, including the condition imposed by the committee. Both staff and committee have recommended the same. Which is approved and approved with a condition. So mover and a seconder for that, please. Mayor Hall and Vice Chair Doherty. Any other questions on this one? All those in favor? That is carried unanimously. Thank you. There you go.
Ask a question. There was a slight difference. They were both to a selection of the different.
My understanding is that it was including the condition imposed and that staff and the committee were on the same page with that moving forward. Is that what we all voted on based on that?
That's what I understood.
Yes, so we're all in agreement. It's what subject to.
Thank you.
Yes. Okay. All right. Next up, the report, a recommendation further that council refuses the heritage permit application for 280-290 here Ontario Street as recommended by staff. Mover and a seconder. Seeing none, then it will move to, and further that council not refuse the heritage permit application for 280-290 here Ontario Street and approve. They're moving. Is that okay? Oh, sorry. Thank you. Staff were ahead of me on that. And further that council approves the September 26 recommendations of the Town of Collingwood's Heritage Committee for 280-290 here Ontario Street, subject to condition. In this case, staff recommended refusal. The committee recommended approval, subject to conditions. So staff receive in writing from a masonry expert with regards to the suitability of the product to the satisfaction of staff. So this alternate moves to the committee's recommendation of approval subject to conditions. Moved by Councillor Hamlin, seconded by Vice Chair Doherty. Any other comments on that? All those in favor? And that is carried unanimously.
You're
Okay.
doing a good job.
Thank you. We're sweating up here. All right. So next up, and further that council approves the heritage permit application for 14 Huron Street and 66 Huron Ontario Street as recommended by staff. In both these cases, I believe that the committee had recommended a deferral for further information. Is there a mover and a seconder for this? Being none, then, oh,
My apologies. Yeah, but
okay. Mayor Hall moves?
That's to approve the staff recommendation? Yes.
Yes.
Okay, I'll second.
Okay, seconded by Councillor Vice Chair Doherty. Any other comments with respect to that? Seeing none, all those in favor? That is carried unanimously. Thank you for that. Okay. All right. So that takes us to, and that the heritage permit applications approved or refused above be deemed complete and staff be directed to issue a notice of receipt to the applicants. And nothing changes based on those previous votes. We're all good. I'm moving a seconder for that, please. Vice Chair Doherty and Councillor Hamlin. Any further comment? All those in favor? And that is carried. Thank you. And further that staff be directed to issue or refuse heritage permits in accordance with the council's decision within 90 days of serving the applicant with a notice of receipt. I'll get a mover and a seconder, and then I'll go to the CAO. Vice Chair Doherty, Councillor Hamlin, CAO Skinner, please.
Thank you. I think that given the votes that went through this evening and the recommendations made by committee, and I don't know if Planner Teakle or the Acting Director Ayers may have a comment, but I think that I would like, as staff, I think it would make sense for us to take a step back and look at exactly what those rules would be, because what has been set out in the report, and yet may be approved by council depending on what votes come forward, is not the same general principles as the committee found to be the way that they'd like to vote this evening. So I think a vote that says, please apply the principles that staff used in the future when the committee hasn't endorsed exactly what those same principles seems to be inconsistent.
Is that with respect to the next and further that, or with? I think maybe that might be with respect to the last one and further that council endorsed the staff interpretation.
Oh, I am sorry. Yes,
Yes.
you are correct.
Okay, so we will keep those comments in abeyance. But for now, nothing above, as we have voted, has changed. And further, that staff be directed to issue or refuse heritage permits in accordance with the council's decision within 90 days of serving the applicant with a notice of receipt. I have a mover and a seconder. All those in favor? And that is carried unanimously. Okay. So that takes us next to, and further that council endorse the staff interpretation of the Collingwood Downtown Heritage Conservation District Plan contained in Report P 2022-36 with regard to painting or repainting of masonry and support future staff delegated heritage permit approvals in accordance with Bylaw 2022-037 repainting of already painted masonry. So I'm not, is there a mover and a seconder with respect to this at this point? Given the CEO has commented that there has been a variance in our approach in terms of whether we wouldn't want to truncate committee input on this for our decision-making process, but that we would recommend to council to still be able to make a decision, but still hear the advisory committee's input on these matters. So I think what the CAO was asking us is to refer that back for some refining, perhaps.
Thank you, Chair. I think that would be appropriate, that we would like to pause prior to, and we may be able to do that pause prior to this coming to council. We do our best just to take another look at the principles and what the committee has expressed in order to finalize the professional opinions of staff, which may or may not change, but I just thought it was inconsistent. Thank you.
Yeah, okay, great. Appreciate that. Okay. So mover to refer that back to staff for a report which may be able to come to council. And that is Vice Chair Doherty and Mayor Hull. Any further comments or questions with respect to that? Hearing none. All those in favor? And that is carried unanimously. So thank you. Woo. All right. So now that brings us to 6.4, which is T 2022-14 with respect to a Connecting Links grant program opportunity regarding resurfacing Highway 26 from Cranberry Trail West to Osler Bluff Road. And what we have done here in the amendment is to remove the second and that, as this is coming under the CAO's delegated authority. And I'll turn it over. Before I put the report on the floor, I will ask the CAO to report on this. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. I can make a quick comment on the delegated authority, but I think if we could get Treasurer Quinlan to just talk about what the project is and why it's coming before council or committee and the public today, you'd be better set up to hear my portion.
Okay, thank you. Treasurer Quinlan, welcome.
Thank you. Thank you through you, Chair Jeffrey, to members of committee and the public. We're bringing this report forward because the 2023-2024 Connecting Links grants applications are due in the next month or so. As many of you are aware, the Connecting Links program are really with respect to roads that connect major highways or towns. And of course, there are a limited number of roads within the town that apply. But when we took a look at overall which pieces of infrastructure we wanted to review, we looked at both the asset management plan along with the DC study to ensure we're not replacing or re-asphalting, repairing sections of road that might be coming up for other growth related projects. And the number one priority that we could find is Osler Bluff Road to Cranberry West Trail along Highway 26. When we look at the PCI for that road, it is poor, or in our own condition assessments for levels of service, it is in the poor range. And we have brought that forward. Now, we have taken a look at the DC study to see if there's a matching portion. And there is a project that has been included in that study where there's a widening that could happen or may happen once traffic counts warrant between that Silver Creek Road and Cranberry Trail West. So we're just trying to see when or what time period that might be reflective. And it is possible that, in fact, we will reduce the amount of resurfacing that we'll do based on that and shorten it just a wee bit up to Silver Creek Drive, which is the most important piece, or the highest, or the lowest, I should say, PCI that we have at this time. So there could be a slight variation when we do the actual application, but at this point, certainly it's in line with our asset management plan, along with this small refinement that might come up because of the DC study.
Thank you. CEO Skinner?
In line with the lame duck provisions that were voted in by council well before the deadlines were set close to the election, for decisions that are over $50,000 in expenditure, council can only make those if they're already in the budget, whereas this is not already in the budget. 90% of the funding would be funded by the Ministry of Transportation, but we would be subject to 10%, which in the current estimate is about $170,000. As this is needed work, the condition is poor, the opportunity is so great, and the opportunity also for preliminary design or further steps in the design to come back to council exist. Just from a formatting perspective, I did use my delegated authority to allow us to commit $170,000 of a future year's budget should we receive I think it's about 1.7 million or something of that sort that would come from the province for this renewal of that portion of our connecting link on Highway 26.
Great. Thank you. All right, so I will just turn to the clerk on delegated authority and a report. Do we still ask if there's anyone in the public who would like to speak to that report before I receive it?
Yes, Chair, because it's a report still being received technically, we should. So if there is anybody present remotely that would like to, we have no attendees participating remotely.
Okay, all up to us. All right, so, okay, I'm trying. I have a grandson to go visit. Okay, I'm trying. All right, that staff report T 2022-14, 2023-24 Connecting Links Grant Program, resurfacing Highway 26 from Cranberry Trail West to Osler Bluff Road be received. A mover and a seconder, please. Mayor Hull and Vice Chair Doherty. Any further questions? Okay, Councillor Hamlin, go ahead.
Okay, I have a comment, and maybe two comments. One is just in response to our treasurer's discussion on development charge projects. I just wanted to mention my understanding, and I'll leave it to her to sort out whether it would have an impact on her understanding. But I had thought, even though DC projects are identified in a DC study and form the basis for how the charge is ultimately calculated, municipalities are not required to follow those projects as long as they're within the category. So I just wanted to raise that and leave it with the treasurer in case that's helpful in how you're sorting out the funding. Secondly, I had asked Director Slama earlier today whether a bicycle lane or lanes had been included in this project, and her answer was not. And although we can't weigh in with a vote on this, I wanted to say that this strikes me as one of these reconstruction projects where we should always be going the extra step and including safe bicycle lanes when portions of a road are being rebuilt and improved. And even though this may even be an isolated part of Highway 26 at this point, other parts of Highway 26, will be redone, I'm sure, as time goes on. And if we set the stage for having a safe, active transportation network when this is being done, then that would be great. And maybe it would influence the town of Blue Mountains. I think a paved shoulder isn't sufficient for the needs of our community and the number of people who would like to do that. So I don't know. I just wanted to ask through you, Madam Chair, to our CAO if that could be included.
Thank you. CEO Skinner.
Thank you. I see Director Slama has put her camera on. Could I
Yes,
ask her
absolutely.
to respond, please?
Yep. Director Slama?
Thank you, Madam Chair. So, yes, I had indicated to Councillor Hamlin that, yeah, currently on this portion of Highway 26, we just have paved shoulders. And, you know, if we look at our cycling plan, it doesn't include the more extensive cycling facilities on this section of Highway 26, likely because we have the Georgian Trail that is close, but not the same type of cycling facility that is recognized. So with this project that we are looking at applying for the funding for, we were just trying to address what Treasurer Quinlan has already indicated, which is poor surface condition, poor surface asphalt condition. So it is, I think it's something we can take into consideration. And I think it's not, it might be easily included if that's a committee's desire in this application, because this is just the first step of looking at what this project is going to entail.
Okay.
Thank
Is that
you.
fine? Okay. I know. It always reminds me of Peter Dunbar's worms on a plate with his trails. We just had a whole bunch of little trails that looked like worms on a plate, and then eventually they all got joined, and we had a great trail system. Vice Chair Doherty.
Thank you. So I hope I'm not actually introducing a wrinkle here, but the paved shoulder that we have right now on that section of road, actually on that connecting link all the way from Osier Bluffs Road to Trot Boulevard, is really, I mean, it's from a road function standpoint, it probably is a paved shoulder, but from the point of view of being useful for anything else, i.e. cycling, it is not, considered a valid treatment of a roadway. My thinking would be, rather than the notion of introducing bike lanes, which are something a little different again, if consideration could be given to a paved shoulder of, I think it's 3 meters, which is what we see on Beechwood. And this would have the benefit not only of providing a paved shoulder of a width that would make it functionally a bike lane, if not in name, but also it would have the benefit of improving the life expectancy of the roadway, because when we pave shoulders, of course, we reduce the crumbling into the traveled area of the road. So I'm probably just making that way too complicated, but is there a possibility that that could be considered, as opposed to a bike lane, just an extra wide paved shoulder?
CEO Skinner.
Thank you, through the chair, to Councillor Doherty. I hear a number of interesting suggestions today. I do, as from a traffic background, have some concerns about putting bicycles on a provincial highway as our preferred alternative to get from A to B. I think this is something that, from a staff perspective, I would like to take away and maybe turn around a bit. We do have a study to put a trail between Highway 26 and Mountain Road in the middle through a number of properties. We also have the bike lanes planned on Mountain Road that will go east-west, and we have the Georgian Trail. And in addition to that, to put an extensive amount of additional asphalt would be, not sure if it's eligible for the province's funding or if that would be a tax-based asset funding. So I think we should take these interesting suggestions back and maybe mull it over a little, maybe even with the Trails Committee, to look at the best places to invest some of our funds. The treasurer did have a brief clarification as well, just around the DC funding. She wanted to mention, if that's okay.
Yes, absolutely. Treasurer Quinlan?
Thank you so much, Chair Jeffrey, through you to members of council. I just wanted to clarify my comments on the DC study. The reason why we were taking a look at that, we want to make sure that when we do complete a resurfacing project, that we're not, 5 or even 10 years down the road, tearing the road back up to do an additional project on top. So not really with respect to funding. Fully understand that, from a DC perspective, that the projects that are included in the study are there as placeholders, not necessarily as an automatic project movement. But we did want to just take a look at the traffic counts and see if that widening was warranted in the next 5, 10, maybe even 15 years in terms of, ripping up the road again after completing this full section. So so my apologies. I probably should have clarified that a little bit better in my opening of the report.
Understood. Thank you. Okay, where am I? We voted on it? Okay, I have a mover and a seconder. Do you have a further comment?
Yeah, I just wanted to say I thought that our CAO's suggestion was a good one to take it back to the Active Transportation Committee and staff to see what the best route might be here.
Yep, and I think there's lots of opportunity in the timing going forward in terms of this, so, or maybe not. When was it due? Yeah,
The application is due within the next month, and we'll need to put a price and a general layout on that within the next month. But once we get into preliminary design and the actual layout, there will be other opportunities for the public and council to comment, with the benefit of the additional consultation that was suggested.
okay, thank you. Yeah, Councillor Doherty?
Thank you. If I could, just wanted to clarify, is the section of 26 between Harbor Street and Trot Boulevard, is that considered connecting link?
Yes, I believe that it is.
I think so too, yes. Yep. It's also all part of our connecting link section, yes.
Okay, perfect. Thank you.
Thank you. So through you, Chair, so that has an extra wide paved shoulder. And so that was my thinking relative to connecting link extension through to Osier Bluffs Road or wherever we deem that it would go.
Okay, thank you. I think they've got it. They're going to take it forward. That's great. Mayor Hill?
And just a clarification, bike lane or no bike lane, today in the particular section that we're talking about, can I actually bike? Or does the Highway Traffic Act prevent me from doing so today?
CEO Skinner or Director Slama, whoever can.
Take that one.
Okay.
It's not a controlled access highway, so you can legally bike on that, unlike something like a 400 series highway, which prohibits bicycles. Highway 26 would allow it, although the speed in that area, I believe, is 70 kilometers an hour. So you'd be mixing with relatively fast vehicles.
It's confusing because connecting link of Highway 26 out on the east side that goes between here and Wasaga Beach. That's a 4-lane highway with a divider in between within town limits. I mean, that's not a 400 series highway. Can I bike on that? I certainly wouldn't advocate to bike on it, but.
From my knowledge, through the chair of working at MTO for quite some time, it would not be illegal to bike on that section that's the connecting link within Collingwood.
Okay, great.
Yeah, thank you.
All right, I'm going to call the vote. All those in favor of receiving the report? Carried unanimously, and thank you for that, CEO Skinner. Great opportunity. All right, so that now takes us to reports and minutes of other committees and boards. And I did miss advising you at the beginning of the agenda that the Collingwood Heritage Committee minutes from July 26th were approved at a meeting in August, so we will not be duplicating that approval this evening. And just to reiterate that the motion we are considering is that the minutes of the Collingwood Heritage Committee meeting held September 26, 2022 be received, and the recommendations not included in Planning Report 6.3 be approved. So can I have a mover and a seconder, please? Vice Chair Doherty, Councillor Hamlin, any questions with respect to those? Seeing none, all those in favor? And that is carried unanimously. Thank you very much. Which moves us to the consent agenda, that council herein receive the general consent agenda, and further that the information and opinions provided in the general consent agenda items are that of the authors and are not verified or approved as being correct. We have one item, 8.1, the MVCA board meeting highlights from September 23rd, 2022. Now simply to receive those, please, as stated, a mover and a seconder. Vice Chair Doherty, Councillor Hamlin, all those in favor? That is carried. Does anybody wish to pull 8.1 and make any comment? Seeing none, that's awesome. We will move to 9, to the departmental update and discussion. 9.1 has been deferred. 9.2, backflow prevention program update by Director Slama and Manager McGinnity. So take it away, Director Slama.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Yeah, I'll start this evening. We have a short deck just to run through, and Manager McGinnity is here to help with any questions that the committee might have. So we've had some conversations with residents recently, and we thought it would be a good opportunity just to provide a little bit of an update on our backflow prevention program to committee this evening. So next slide, please. So as a background, we do have a bylaw. It was passed in 2017. It is called the Backflow and Cross Connection Control Bylaw. The intent of the bylaw is to protect our municipal drinking water system. And this was spur out of Justice O'Connor's Walkerton report, and the resulting Safe Drinking Water Act that came from his inquiry, or the inquiry that he led. And in section 11, it does state that municipalities are required to ensure that municipal drinking water system complies with the safe drinking water standards to the point where the system is connected to a user's plumbing system. So, that means that, when the water leaves our water treatment plant, and as it moves through our distribution system, we do have a responsibility to ensure that we're meeting the Safe Drinking Water Act standards at all points until it hits the curb stops of all the individual connections to our distribution system. And when we developed the bylaw, we were following the Canadian Standards Association B64.10-11. And that is the Canadian standard that defines the different level of hazards, potential hazards, and then speaks to which devices would be required to address the different kinds of hazards. So that's the basis of our bylaw. Next slide, please. So lots of questions about what type of buildings does the bylaw apply to? So our bylaw applies to all existing and future commercial, industrial, institutional, multi-residential dwellings or buildings, I should say, buildings that have connections to irrigation systems, buildings that have fire connections, residential buildings where auxiliary water is available, and premises or buildings where a condition is found that may be a hazard to the municipal drinking water system. So, while we have talked in the past a lot about the ICI, which is the acronym for Industrial, Commercial, Institutional, there are some other types of buildings that the bylaw does apply to. And again, where the bylaw applies to these premises or buildings, and that's the first step of identification in the bylaw. So regardless of the type of commercial establishment that may be in a building, the fact that it is a commercial establishment and what triggers the application of the bylaw and kind of starts the process. So again, the level of hazard is determined, or I didn't say this yet, the level of hazard is determined through a site investigation. And what I did mention was that the level of hazard determines the type of device that needs to be installed. Next slide, please. So what are the responsibilities of a property owner in the town of Collingwood? So if you have any one of those premises, then when contacted by our town's backflow prevention officer, you will be asked to complete a site survey and provide the results of that survey to the backflow prevention officer. Now, the surveys and the recertification and many of the tasks that we speak to in the bylaw, they must be completed by a qualified contractor. And so this is a town-approved qualified contractor that has some certification on backflow devices. And we do include a list of qualified contractors on our town website, on our backflow prevention information page. So based on the survey findings, that will determine the appropriate device that needs to be installed. Property owner then has the responsibility to maintain the device and complete an annual inspection or recertification of the device. They must notify the town if there's any alteration, if they complete any alterations to their plumbing connections or changes of site activities on the site, because the type of activity happening on the site also determines the level of hazard, which determines the type of device. Every 5 years from the last survey, a property owner is required to complete and submit a new site survey. And for all of these above requirements, this is at the the owner's cost. And we do have some modest municipal fees that are also related to the administration of the program. So on the next slide, I'll touch on those. Next slide, please. So some typical costs that we are aware of. We start with the site survey, again, completed by the qualified contractors. That's typically in the range of $175 to $250. It just depends on the qualified contractor that is selected. The device, which is will be the outlay of the highest kind of capital investment from a property owner. So again, the price of the device varies a lot, and it's hard for us to provide the public or council an idea of really what a typical cost is, because it's dependent on the size of the water service, and it's really dependent on the level of hazard and the type of device. But, we've provided a bit of a range here. So if you're a commercial business, so maybe you're a clothing store in town, which would not be considered a hazardous use. You don't have any connections to a potential severe hazards, on your internal plumbing, your device might be in the range of $1,000 or $1,500. But if you're one of our larger industrial manufacturing companies in town, then they have much bigger sizes of their water service and much more complicated processes downstream. And so their devices are quite a bit of money, can be in the range of $20,000. When you look at the annual recertification, again, completed by the qualified contractors, that's in the range of $175 to $250. And then our town fees include providing $100 when the initial site survey is submitted, and each test report is $50 per device. So some locations, dependent on their plumbing, they may need to have more than one device, and so it's $50 per device. And then there's test tags, which are also required at $5 each per device, and those are installed by the qualified contractors annually. So this gives a bit of an idea of the costs that we've seen. Next slide, please. So what is the status of our Collingwood program? I just thought this would be some good information, again, for committee and public. So almost all of our existing industrial, commercial, and institutional and multi-residential users have been surveyed. So approximately about 99%, 98, 99%, and that's about 646 locations or premises. So the 646 have been surveyed. We consider this exceptional compliance to our town bylaw to date. As I mentioned, it's been in place since 2017, so it's taken us a little bit to get there. But we do have essentially all of our industrial, commercial, and institutional and multi-residential uses complying with our bylaw. Our communication to the property owners does provide opportunity for grace periods to meet our requirements. So we did change the communication a few years ago. And we made sure that we have more of a staged compliance reminders. So we're, notifying owners, property owners of the requirement. Our backflow prevention officer is always willing to work with the property owners, help explain what's required and why it's required, help them with some resources that are available on our website to find the qualified contractors and things like that. So we have provided grace periods for some businesses, and we are open to that. And our next step beyond this first group of the four categories, the next one of the big next levels is the addressing connections that have an irrigation system. So we're just starting to think about developing an educational component because this will include, the way the bylaw is written now, it will include residential premises that have irrigation systems connected to the internal plumbing. And so, we need to think about how the right way to roll this out, understanding even for ourselves as staff and for council, right, what that's going to mean resource-wise to roll this out and follow through with the bylaw. So, with that, the last point is that, staff do review our bylaws periodically, and we do consider operational improvements, and we reflect on the new input that we have received from both residents and councils, and in this case, property owners. We have identified a review of this bylaw in 2023. So, open for any comments. And again, there will be an opportunity for the new council, of course, to provide some comments. So that's our last slide, I believe. Next slide, please. Yes. So Heather and I are here if you have any questions.
Okay, thank you. So CAO Skinner would like to add to your presentation.
Mhm.
Thank you, Chair. Just one brief comment. I realized as Director Slamo was walking through the presentation, we didn't talk a lot about the real risk, and the risk includes water, dirty water, or chemicals being sucked backwards into the drinking water system. So I just wanted to make sure that was clear to someone who had, say, an irrigation pipe in their yard, and the potential for that some water that was in the irrigation system to be sucked backwards into the town system and then it's supplied to another household.
Thank you. I'm having a brain block here. We don't know public, right? Perfect. Okay. So Councillor Hammond.
Thank you. I have a few questions for you, Madam Chair.
Yep. I'm just going to confirm they're they're specific to
No.
policy, not to any
Policy,
locations.
that's it.
Okay. Thank you.
So the first one I had is I read on the presentation that multi-residential properties are caught by this. What is considered a multi-residential property through you?
Thank you. Dr. Slama?
Thank you, Chair. I'll ask Manager McGinnity if she could confirm that, please.
Yeah, sure. Certainly, through you, Madam Chair, to Councillor Hanlon. We typically look at properties with 4 residential units or more, comprising as a multi-residential property.
Okay, so through you, this means then I was thinking about our intention to have more accessory units attached to single-family homes, but typically that wouldn't put more than 3 units on a property, so that wouldn't, at this point, trigger the application of this bylaw.
That's correct. I would agree with that.
Okay, thank you. And I also noticed that what is caught is residential, but only where auxiliary water is available. Could you explain what that means?
Manager McGinnity?
Sure. So in some situations, I don't know how often or how frequently they occur. You could also have a private well that's being used for irrigation systems. So there's potential for cross connections between an untreated water supply and our potable drinking water system. So that's one example. Pumping from surface water, another example. We do also have our industrial system, so they could be connected to our industrial non-potable water system and also have a potable water system connection. So there's various scenarios that we could see.
Is particularly over the last few years, we've seen a great rise in home occupation, home business, businesses being located in homes. Let me put it that way. Many of which, of course, would be considered commercial if they were anywhere else, but they're now in homes. How is staff interpreting our bylaw for these home businesses?
Manager McGinnity?
Yes, through you, Madam Chair. So as they come to our attention, we are addressing them as commercial because of their use and the activities at the property. Under our CSA standard, they're identified as a moderate hazard rating. So looking for that site survey to be completed to confirm that the level of protection, a minimum of a moderate hazard rating. So what level of protection would be required in order to comply with our backflow prevention bylaw. So they're not as easy to identify because quite often there's not signage, there's no registration. So it's difficult to identify those. But as they come to our attention, we are reaching out to the property owner and making them aware of the requirements of our backflow prevention bylaw.
And so just as a follow-up to that, so there's every type of home business I've observed being carried on in our community. There's lawyers working from home, real estate agents have their offices, accountants no longer have generally offices, they're working from home. Are those caught as well?
Through you, Madam Chair, I would suggest if the business is registered at that property, then yes, we would be looking to reach out and coordinate with those people.
Okay, I'm finding this is quite problematic, and I know your presentation, is because I asked a lot of questions, and I'm not going to address any specific properties. But I think as more and more of these home businesses are targeted, we're going to hear more and more as council members, and I think maybe our next council, because we're almost done here now, but this should be a matter brought forward to our next council for a full discussion, because if I'll just throw it out there, if a third of our homes in our community have some kind of home office in it, this is a huge decision, I think, for our council to make, whether to put this cost on our homeowners. So thank you.
Okay, thank you. Manager McGinnity, go ahead.
Sorry, I just wanted to provide some additional context. It would, you're speaking of office work taking place in a residential property. We do require office buildings to comply with our backflow prevention program as well. So just from an apples to apples perspective, in terms of the type of risks that you would see in an office environment, they are required to comply as well.
All right. Mayor Hall.
I fully agree and support Councillor Hamlin, and I hope the next council looks at that. For tax purposes, I use 25% of my home as a write-off. I don't have any clients coming to my home. But by that definition, I would be subject to this? No, thanks.
Okay. Theo Skinner?
I was just going to say, I think this is a healthy conversation to have, and that we do have plans to review the bylaw. One of the first steps in the bylaw is looking at a risk review based on the actual site, and I think there might be some opportunities there to produce or strengthen, or maybe just embrace what we already have with respect to where does a risk actually get introduced to the drinking water system, because that's really the intention in the end, is that we all have safe drinking water. So I think with that overriding consideration, we can figure something out that builds on or adjusts what we have to be good for Collingwood.
Agreed. Yeah. Yep. Mayor Hall?
Just to clarify, I appreciate that staff is just bringing the information as it relates to the specific bylaw. I'm just saying in that context, I hope it is addressed, because that it doesn't make sense, because I would fall under that, and I have no additional persons in the house.
Yep. Similar. I'm a bookkeeper. Okay. Councillor Lorie, did you have anything? No? Yes? Quickly?
No, but I definitely concur. Yeah, no, but since you asked.
Well,
No,
that'll teach me.
I concur that a risk review is definitely warranted.
I think we're all on the same page here, and I think the CAO summed it up perfectly. All right. So if there's nothing further on that, thank you very much, Director Slama and Manager McGinnity, for your thorough report and background information for us here. That's great. So now we're moving into public delegations. We have... Okay, so Clerk Almas, please check online to see if somebody would like to speak to us.
Thank you, Chair Jeffrey. We do have a few attendees online right now. Before we conclude our meeting, you are provided up to 5 minutes if you wish to address the standing committee regarding something within their mandate. If you wish to address the committee, please press the raise your hand feature at the bottom of your screen. There's no interest at this time, Chair Jeffrey.
Thank you very much. But thank you for engaging and watching our meeting. So that brings us to other business. Does anyone have any other business that we haven't covered? Councillor Hamlin.
I think I have two matters. One is the motion that we discussed earlier that I had raised. And that was to...
So this will be a notice of motion. Is that it?
Yes, yes. Is this a good place for this?
Perfect place.
Perfect, thank you. Yes, a notice of motion to determine whether our property standards bylaw could be amended to include preventing water from draining from one property to another.
Okay. All right. So we've received that notice, and you had another item?
Second one was, it's a question for our CAO, and I only gave her a notice of this late this afternoon because I had forgotten to send it earlier. So but the question was, with respect to the proposal for the Poplar Health and Wellness Village, has a traffic study been done for that development? Thank you.
Chair, to Councillor Hamlin, there was some high-level functional information that was provided by the proponents early in the work that has not been presented publicly to date. We do the approach that is being used through an MZO is one in which the typical planning processes don't go through in the order they can go through in the order they normally would, but in this case, we're skipping some steps. And number of the studies that would normally be provided at the outset or as the layouts are set out have not yet been provided. And one of the things, based on the resolution that Council approved on I believe it was the 18th of August, the Mayor and the Deputy Mayor and myself and a few others are working with the proponents and the province to look at if there are any final adjustments to the MZO, as well as an accompanying agreement that would ensure that council gets what it needs to move forward. And one of the things that staff have suggested in those negotiations, which are not complete, is that there are a set of studies that need to be produced prior to council endorsing subsequent steps, such as block plans, site plans, or plans of subdivision. So we do have some consideration on how we would make sure that those studies are committed. Right now, what we have is the vision, which sets out what we've all deemed as an advantageous approach for Collingwood, and then an MZO, which provides quite a bit of flexibility on what is actually built and where it's built within the overall site. I think maybe I'll stop there unless you have subsequent question.
No, I'll just add a comment because as I've been talking to members of the community over the last month or two, traffic just comes up all the time. And that's why I started thinking about this development and whether major roadworks would be required to accommodate a community, in essence, of 2,000 residential units and 2 million square feet of non-residential development. And if it was required, who was going to pay for it? Because typically a developer would be required to pay for road improvements to accommodate their subdivision or project, I should call it. And, the timing for that infrastructure and, just how it's all going to work, because that is going to be a huge part of moving people in and off that site. And I just want to make sure that it's given priority as these discussions continue. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Hamlin. So I have every confidence that we put the process for all three parties to be in the same room at the same time, with the hope that we can expedite some of these things that are ahead of us. So it's great. All right. Councillor Doherty.
It'll be quick.
Thank you.
As staff and I think probably my colleagues are aware, we've had a few residents generally in the area of the Monaco condominiums express concern about the noise that's emanating from their rooftop HVAC system. And I'm just wondering if I could prevail upon staff for an update as to what can and has been done with that.
Thank you. I know I saw emails from Mayor Hull today that he's been following up with staff, and maybe CEO can just comment on that. Clerk Almas? Okay.
Certainly, I am aware that Bylaw has been working with the proponents together with the building department because it pertains to the commissioning of their HVAC system. Right now, it's lesser of an issue because the noise only occurs sporadically whenever the AC is on. However, Bylaw officers have met with the proponent at the end of last week, and they've confirmed that they are installing an acoustic wall until this commissioning of the unit is rectified. So there will be one installed in the very near future.
Thank you for that update. Follow up?
Yes. Is that something that we, in a modern building with presumably the most modern HVAC system, is that an issue that we should even anticipate? It just surprised me that would even be a thing.
Clerk Almas, you want to?
Certainly, I through the chair to Councillor Doherty, I would agree. I asked the same questioning. However, our officers did speak with our building officials as well and said that there is certain units that have quite a commissioning process in place once new units are installed. So this may be something that we'll have to consider if we need any further amendments noise bylaw pertaining to issues like this, but we trust that this one will be rectified within the next couple weeks at the latest.
Great. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Excuse me. Just one quick question. CEO Skinner, is there anything required further from us in terms of a site modification bylaw? Is that discussion going to come up under another report, or is it something the committee should be asking to be pursued by staff?
Earlier this evening, there was, I can't recall if it was a notice of motion or a request to adjust the report that we were talking about at the time. And it referred to whether we should be making adjustments to our property standards bylaw. But I think if staff felt that it was better placed in a different type of bylaw, we would return that as part of our response to the direction we've already received.
Okay.
Just to complete the story, tree bylaw that council asked us to look into, we did put as part of that scope that the consultant consider best practices for site modification bylaws, not particularly with respect to drainage or fill, but just in general. So that may also lead us toward looking at that type of bylaw.
Okay, it was just, I didn't want to leave it hanging because it was kind of something that didn't have some finality for me from the meeting. Okay, that's great. All right, so if there's no other business, then I'll look for someone to move adjournment. S'il te plaît. Vice Chair Doherty, all those in favor? That is carried unanimously. Thank you, everyone, for all that hard work and for all the hard work our staff are doing outside in other processes right now on top of this. So thank you for those endeavors.